Chapter 1927. On the Sky Bell Mountain, the battle between Chu Mu and Huang Chu was very short. Huang Chu had only attacked 3 times in a row. After that, Chu Mu had only used one sword to end the battle. Therefore, it did not cause much of a commotion. No one knew that the #1 expert of the Sky Bell region had fallen. Inside the Sky Bell cave, the seals were all activated. Even if an exceptional expert wanted to enter, it would be extremely difficult. Naturally, with Chu Mu's attainments in sealing, he was unable to set up such a level of seal. This was the original seal of the Sky Bell Cave. Huang Chu had spent a large sum of money to invite a sealing master with astonishing attainments in sealing to set it up. Chu Mu sat in the Sky Bell Cave and adjusted his condition. The Sword God Descends secret technique had a total of 3 levels. It was a secret technique that was passed down in the True God Sword sect a long time ago. It was a part of the sword universe. The first level of the Sword God Descends secret technique could increase one's sharpness by 10 times. The second level of the Sword God Descends secret technique could increase one's sharpness by 100 times. The third level of the Sword God Descends secret technique could increase one's sharpness by 1,000 times. Previously, Chu Mu had mastered the first level, which was a great help to him. After many life and death battles, it had killed many strong enemies for Chu Mu. There was no doubt that the second level would be much stronger than the first level. However, the treasures required for the second level were much more than the first level. In terms of quantity, it had doubled. Now, Chu Mu had finally gathered all the treasures required for the second level. Soon, Chu Mu had adjusted his essence, chi and spirit to the peak. He opened his eyes, and a radiance suddenly shot out. It was like 2 sharp sword light that pierced through the void and landed on the various treasures in front of him. Taking a deep breath, Chu Mu waved his hand and melted all the treasures into liquid. One after another, they merged into the essence of the 8 forces of heaven and earth for them to absorb. From start to finish, it took Chu Mu a total of 5 days to complete. After he was done, Chu Mu once again recovered the power of his soul and other powers he had consumed. Recovering to his peak, Huang Xiaolong waved his hands, and the 8 different kinds of energy of heaven and earth flew up, revolving around Chu Mu. With Chu Mu as the center, the energy of heaven and earth spun faster and faster. Then, the energy of heaven and earth entered Chu Mu's body and melted. Sword God's Descent, second stage. Chu Mu let out a low shout, and a strange power kept vibrating. It was transmitted through his body. The power of the first layer of the Sword God's Descent secret technique was immediately activated. It rapidly absorbed the power of the 8 types of world's essence in a special way. The speed of absorption was not fast. He absorbed it bit by bit. At the same time, the power of the first level of the Sword God's Descent that Chu Mu had consumed was rapidly recovering. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Time flew by. The power of the secret technique in Chu Mu's body kept increasing. Moreover, the power of the secret technique that was even purer and stronger was gradually replacing the power of the first layer. That was the power of the second layer, an even stronger power of the secret technique. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu had cultivated in the Sky Bell Cave for more than a month. During this time, he was not disturbed at all. From beginning to end, he had mastered the second layer of the Sword God's Descent secret technique. Inside the Sky Bell Cave, Chu Mu stretched out his hand and activated a strand of the power of the Sword God's Descent secret technique. Strands of power gathered on his finger. As it pulsed, it was like a strand of silver sword light. Looking at it, one would feel as if one's eyes were being pierced by needles. It was painful. This is the power of the second layer of the Sword God's Descent secret technique. 100-fold sharpness. It's too shocking. Chu Mu thought to himself. He was overjoyed. The use of the Sword God's Descent secret technique did not have any side effects. Furthermore, It could be used in an instant to increase one's strength. It was truly an extremely profound and powerful secret technique. In the entire deep blue world, there was almost no secret technique that could be compared to the Sword God's Descent secret technique. Heaven Burning Blood Prison, Sword Domain Change. Now that the Sword God's Descent secret technique has reached the second layer, my strength will definitely surpass the past. I can even fight against an expert at the peak of the second refinement. Chu Mu said confidently. His eyes shone brightly. In the deep blue world, an expert at the limit of second refinement could already dominate a region. Many powerful sects and forces might not even have an expert at the limit of second refinement overseeing them. Ancient forces like the Imperial Court were extremely rare. With the strength at the peak of the second refinement, if he used the Great Heaven's Might Sword style, it would definitely be even more powerful. At that time, even some of the weaker initial third refinement would feel threatened. After returning to the deep blue world from the land of exile, Chu Mu's strength had increased by leaps and bounds in just a few short years. This was unimaginable. However, if it wasn't for the 30 years of accumulation in the land of exile, he wouldn't have been able to reach this step. After all, if he didn't enter the land of exile back then, there was basically no path for him in the deep blue world. After returning to the deep blue world, to be able to obtain such a harvest and increase in strength sounded very shocking. However, it didn't fall from the sky. It was Chu Mu's hard work. He even walked on the edge of life and death to obtain it. The greater the effort, the greater the harvest. There's still more than 2 months left. It's enough for me to rush to the Sky Dragon Domain. Chu Mu thought to himself. Now, his strength had reached a certain height. If he wanted to increase it again, it would be very difficult. There wasn't much meaning in continuing to cultivate in seclusion unless he could grasp a cultivation technique that could refine true intent. Unfortunately, he had a cultivation technique that could refine laws, but he didn't have a cultivation technique that could refine true intent. During the 2 years of seclusion, he had spent a period of time to deduce it. However, the difficulty was too great. Without a few hundred years to deduce it, it was impossible to change the foundation of a cultivation technique that could refine laws into a cultivation technique that could refine true intent. This path wasn't feasible for the time being. The other was the sword intent. Now that the Annihilation Sword intent had transformed more and more, it wasn't far from the complete transformation. Once the complete transformation was completed, Chu Mu's strength would have an obvious increase when he used the sword intent. At that time, entering the third refinement wouldn't be a problem. His true cultivation wasn't peerless and was only at the peak of the Saint Realm. However, his strength had reached the peak of the second refinement and could even reach the third refinement. Since ancient times, no one would believe it if they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, because it was too shocking. With my current strength, there shouldn't be anyone who can go against me in the Imperial Court if the 10 kings don't come out. After a period of time, when the sword intent's complete transformation is completed, I will even have the qualifications to fight against the 10 kings. Chu Mu thought to himself. He was full of confidence. It was time to leave. His figure flashed as he removed the layers of seals. He quickly left the Sky Bell Cave and flew towards the Sky Dragon Domain. In the sky, 2 figures were flying at a fast speed. They swept past and quickly flew towards the Sky Dragon Domain. It has been more than 2 years. Where did Chu Mu go? Said Zhan Wuying. His eyes were filled with hatred and anger. Even though 2 years had passed, his hatred and killing intent towards Chu Mu and Kong Lu hadn't weakened in the slightest. Instead, with the passage of time, it had become even more intense. It has been more than 2 years. If he deliberately hid, it wouldn't be so easy to find him, Zhan Wukong said calmly. However, his heart was also burning with killing intent. Zhan Wuji, Zhan Wushuang, and Zhan Wuming were all his brothers. Although they weren't blood brothers, they were closer than blood brothers. Their deaths made Zhan Wukong very sad. He also had an extremely strong killing intent towards the people who killed them. Since 2 years ago, the two of them had been sent out by the warlord to kill Chu Mu. They hadn't returned to the imperial court because they hadn't completed the warlord's mission. They hadn't killed the murderer to avenge their 3 brothers. What was interesting was that the sky race didn't tell the imperial court that Chu Mu had fallen into the spatial black hole. In the eyes of the sky race, the human race was just a weak race. Even an ancient and powerful force like the imperial court was nothing to the sky race. Because the imperial court didn't know about this, they thought that Chu Mu was still alive. Of course, in reality, Chu Mu was indeed still alive. Moreover, he was living very well. His strength had increased greatly. In these 2 years, Zhan Wukong and Zhan Wuing had searched almost the entire Sky Dragon domain. They didn't miss a single place. However, they still couldn't find any traces of Chu Mu. Now, they planned to leave Sky Dragon domain and go to other domains to find Chu Mu. After cultivating the 2nd level of the Sword God's Descent secret technique, Chu Mu's strength had increased greatly after using all his techniques. He could even fight against experts at the peak of the 2nd refinement. However, his speed didn't increase at all. This was because the increase in his strength was due to the secret technique. It wasn't his own basic strength. If his basic strength didn't increase, his speed wouldn't increase either. However, with his current speed, he wasn't inferior to an ordinary expert at the 2nd refinement. He was extremely fast as he approached Sky Dragon domain. The Heaven Bell region was a medium-sized region, but the Heavenly Dragon region was a large region. Between the Heaven Bell region and the Heavenly Dragon region were 2 small regions. With Chu Mu's speed, he could definitely reach the Heavenly Dragon region in the remaining 2 months. As long as he had enough time, he wouldn't be in a hurry. As he flew, Chu Mu divided his attention. He comprehended the sword of heaven and earth and unknowingly increased his strength. As time passed, Chu Mu also entered the 2nd small domain. After that, he would enter Sky Dragon domain. In front of him, 2 figures flew over. Their speed was extremely fast, as if they were 2nd refinement absolute experts. This caused Chu Mu to be surprised. Since when were the absolute experts of Deep Blue World so worthless? Now he had encountered them again. When they got closer, Chu Mu suddenly realized that they were from the imperial court. One of them was Zhan Wuing, who had chased after him, and Kong Lu. He didn't know the other person, but his aura was even stronger than Zhan Wuing's. He should be the first of the imperial court's 5 heavenly generals. Zhan Wukong. Very good. Since I met you here, don't even think about leaving here alive. Chu Mu thought. His heart was filled with killing intent. He had already sentenced Zhan Wukong and Zhan Wuing to death. Chapter 1928. Sword Realm. Without hesitation, Chu Mu used the power of the Sword Realm. With the silver light spiritual sword and eternal spiritual sword in his hands, his speed increased. Flying Heaven sword manipulation technique. The sword light flashed, and he became one with the sword. His speed increased again, and he rushed towards Zhan Wukong and Zhan Wuing. Zhan Wukong and Zhan Wuing had noticed Chu Mu, especially Zhan Wuing, who felt that he looked familiar. However, Chu Mu was wearing a blood-red robe now. He looked different from before, so they did not recognize him immediately. "It's you." Zhan Wuing recognized Chu Mu. The hatred accumulated in his heart instantly exploded. The endless waves and waves almost made him lose his mind. "You deserve to die!" With a furious roar, Zhan Wuing unleashed all of his strength. A loud boom resounded, shaking the void. His body flickered and disappeared without a trace. The next moment, Zhan Wuing appeared in front of Chu Mu. At some point, he was holding an almost transparent short sword in his hand. It was hard to detect, but the sharpness that instantly blossomed was extremely shocking. This sword cut through the void and slashed towards Chu Mu's throat. That sharpness would cut off one's head if it hit. Zhan Wukong also recognized Chu Mu. Although he had not seen Chu Mu in person, he had seen Chu Mu's portrait. Therefore, he attacked as well. His figure seemed to have merged into the void. When he reappeared, he was right behind Chu Mu. Holding the sword in one hand, he instantly stabbed out. The sword light split into numerous densely packed sword rays that engulfed Chu Mu's entire body, cutting off all escape routes and dodging. Pincer attack. Zhan Wuying was at the beginner's second refining, while Zhan Wukong was at the middle second refining. The two of them were very coordinated, and they could easily kill experts of the same level. Unfortunately, they could not compare to Chu Mu's strength. Sword God's Descent. With a low shout, Chu Mu activated the power of the second level of the Sword God's Descent. In an instant, the sharpness of the two swords increased by 100-fold. In an instant, his strength at the peak of the beginner stage of second refinement increased by 100-fold. He skipped the intermediate stage of second refinement, skipped the advanced stage of second refinement, and reached the peak of second refinement. A terrifying light blossomed from the two swords, causing Zhan Wukong and Zhan Wuying to shiver. It was as if a formless sword chi had cut through their bodies. They had never imagined that Chu Mu could actually erupt with such a terrifying sharpness, directly amplifying it by 100 times. That's right, 100-fold increase. In the Imperial Dynasty, there were some secret techniques that could instantly increase one's destructive power, but at most it was 10 times. It was also very difficult to cultivate, and the side effects were obvious. Unless they had no choice, they wouldn't use it. How could they have imagined that Chu Mu would possess a secret technique that could be used in an instant and amplify one's strength by 100 times? That could no longer be described with the word terrifying. If they knew that there was an even higher level of the secret technique that could amplify one's strength by 1,000 times, how shocked would they be? One had to know that even in the true God Sword sect back then, no one had managed to cultivate the third level of the Sword God's Descent. After all, the third level required more than 10 types of heaven and earth essence, and each type required a large amount. Not to mention the third level, even the second level was only grasped by 3 people in the true God Sword sect at its peak. Moreover, the Sword God's Descent secret technique was the absolute inheritance of the true God Sword sect. It was a part of the sword heaven and earth and was incomparably important. It was an extremely big secret. In the entire true God Sword sect, there were very few people who knew about it. Those who had tried it were all dead and did not leave any records. If Chu Mu was weak, Zhan Wuying and Zhan Wukong would definitely try to obtain that secret technique. Once they obtained it and cultivated it, their strength would definitely reach a terrifying level. If they gave it to the Imperial Dynasty, they would receive a huge reward. Unfortunately, Chu Mu's explosive strength and sharpness caused their hearts to turn cold and their bodies to tremble. Zhan Wuing's sword slashed towards Chu Mu's throat. It was invisible and extremely fast. However, Chu Mu's sword was even faster. With a flash of silver light, Zhan Wuing's sword couldn't block that terrifying sharpness and was directly cut apart. The silver light spiritual sword didn't seem to be obstructed at all and continued towards Zhan Wuing. Zhan Wuing didn't have time to dodge at all. With a flash of sword light, his neck was instantly cut off and he flew up. The eternal spirit sword trembled, and a terrifying energy exploded. Its sharpness was unstoppable, and it shattered all of Zhan Wukong's sword images before stabbing forward. Zhan Wukong's strength was, after all, stronger than Zhan Wuing. At the critical moment, he dodged, barely managing to avoid being hit in his vitals. Yet, Chu Mu's reaction was even faster. With the heart sword as one, all reactions were within Chu Mu's grasp. With a flick of his wrist, the sword changed from a straight stab to a horizontal slash. It was extremely fast, but Zhan Wukong reacted instantly and dodged. He was slightly injured. Chu Mu changed his move for the 3rd time. Zhan Wukong couldn't dodge anymore and his neck was cut. Under the shocking sharpness, Even if Zhang Wukong's neck was 10 times harder, it wouldn't be able to block at all. Double sword, double kill. In just one exchange, Zhan Wuying and Zhan Wukong, who could have made Chu Mu flee in panic, didn't even have the chance to use their full strength before their heads were cut off by Chu Mu's sword. Cutting off their heads didn't mean that they were dead. Their primordial spirits were still there. Without any hesitation, Zhan Wuying and Zhan Wukong's primordial spirits left their heads and flew in different directions at a shocking speed. They made up their minds that even if Chu Mu wanted to chase them, he could only chase one. As long as the other escaped and returned to the imperial dynasty, they could bring the news back. Chu Mu, who could use the 100-fold amplification technique, was definitely terrifying. Maybe he would bring disaster to the imperial dynasty, and they had to pay attention to him. Unfortunately, Chu Mu's heart and sword as one could cover a 25-meter radius. Everything within 25 meters was within his senses. The appearance of Zhan Wuying and Zhan Wukong's primordial spirits was also within Chu Mu's control. He attacked. The sword light shot out quickly and caught up to the two primordial spirits, instantly piercing through them. Their consciousness dissipated and their primordial spirits shattered. Easily, Chu Mu killed the first and second heavenly generals of War Monarch's 5 heavenly generals. Now, for of War Monarch's 5 heavenly generals had died under Chu Mu's sword. As for the third heavenly general, he self-detonated. One had to say that the imperial dynasty's losses weren't small. Or rather, the imperial dynasty's losses weren't small. Once the two of them died, their interspatial rings became Chu Mu's spoils of war. As generals of the imperial dynasty and top experts of the second refinement, there were many good things in their interspatial rings. This is Void Steps. Chu Mu picked up a manual and took a look. It was a secret technique that couldn't increase one's strength, but it had miraculous effects in battle. It was the same technique that Zhan Wukong had used before. He instantly disappeared and reappeared behind Chu Mu. Not bad, I can learn it. I can use it at a crucial moment, Chu Mu thought to himself. With his comprehension, after reading it once, he comprehended 30% of the Void Steps content. After memorizing the content, Chu Mu continued forward and comprehended the Void Steps that he had just obtained. To cultivate this secret technique, one needed to use the Space Law Crystal. However, there wouldn't be any side effects when using it. It was just that after using it once, a corresponding amount of the secret technique would be consumed. Once the secret technique's power was used up, it would have to be replenished. Since Zhan Wukong had cultivated the Void Steps, he would naturally prepare a portion of the Space Law Crystal. Among the Space Law Crystals, there were high and low values. The 5 Elements Law Crystal was the most common, while the Space Law Crystal was the most valuable. One Space Law Crystal could be exchanged for 10 5 Elements Law Crystals. There weren't many Space Law Crystals in Zhan Wukong's interspatial ring, only a dozen. He hadn't started cultivating yet, so Chu Mu didn't know how many times he could use the Void Steps. Soon, Chu Mu entered the Sky Dragon territory and quickly flew towards the valley where he had killed Zhan Wushuang and Zhan Wuming. When Chu Mu arrived at the valley, there was still more than a month before the 3-year agreement with Kong Lu. The valley was silent. Kong Lu hadn't come yet, so Chu Mu stayed in the valley for the time being. After completely comprehending the Void Steps secret technique, Chu Mu took out a Space Law Crystal and started cultivating the Void Steps secret technique. Although the Void Steps secret technique was unfathomable, it couldn't be compared to a secret technique like the Sword God's Descent. Therefore, Chu Mu didn't find it difficult to cultivate it. Soon, he mastered the Void Steps secret technique. Void Steps. With a silent chant, Chu Mu instantly executed it. He took a step forward, and the power of the Void Steps secret technique stored in his body instantly spread throughout his body. Chu Mu felt as if he had entered a spatial crack. He moved forward rapidly and appeared 100 meters away. This was a very magical experience. However, the speed of the Void Step's secret technique was only a little faster than his explosive speed. It wasn't much of an advantage, but there was one difference. The Void Step's secret technique was used in spatial cracks, so it was difficult to intercept. The power of the secret technique condensed from a space law crystal could only be used once. Chu Mu absorbed the remaining 10 space law crystals and stored them as the power of the Void Step's secret technique. He executed the Void Step's secret technique 3 more times. Only by doing so could he familiarize himself with it and control it accurately. He wouldn't lose control and appear in other places after executing the secret technique. Time passed, and soon a month had passed. 5 figures flew across the sky towards the valley. Their speed was extremely fast, and it didn't take long for them to enter the valley. Brother Chu Mu. Kong Lu saw Chu Mu in the valley at a glance. Brother Kong Lu. Chu Mu responded and looked at the other 4. He had seen one of them before. It was Lei Ba. Lei Ba also looked at Chu Mu and greeted Chu Mu. The other 3 were unfamiliar. The 3 of you. This is the Chu Mu I mentioned. Brother Chu Mu, let me introduce you. Kong Lu introduced both parties. Chapter 1929. Chu Mu recognized the 5 of them and was quite familiar with them. They were all experts at the middle level of second refinement. But because they cultivated the path of space, they could fight against ordinary advanced second company experts. Even if they faced those at the peak of second refinement, they still had enough power to protect themselves. Lei Ba, whom Yi Futian had met in the celestial ancient sacred temple, and they had fought before. Although they knew each other, they were not familiar with each other. He was also an expert at the middle level of second refinement and specialized in the path of thunder. His combat strength was astonishing, and he could even fight against advanced second company experts. However, his survival skills were not as good as Kong Lu's. Wang Sun was a very short, middle-aged man. He was only half the height of a normal person and had the strength of a beginner second refinement. He specialized in the path of darkness and was not strong in frontal combat. He was good at hiding and assassination, and had once assassinated an advanced second refinement expert. Although he did not succeed in the end, he managed to injure the other party and escape unscathed. Xia Yongxuan was dressed in plain clothes. His hair was white, and the crow's feet at the corner of his eyes were very obvious. He looked like he had experienced the vicissitudes of life, as if he had experienced countless joys and sorrows. Under his calm eyes, there was always a trace of indistinct sadness. His cultivation was at the advanced second refinement, and he used a sword. He was a sword cultivator. The last person was called Feng Wuhen. He was handsome, and there was a trace of arrogance between his brows. His strength was also the most profound among the group. He was at the peak of second refinement and was also a sword cultivator. Brother Chu Mu, I'll call you that too, Lei Ba said. Brother Lei, Chu Mu said. Lei Ba immediately laughed. Are you the Chu Mu that Kong Lu mentioned? The one who has not reached the unparalleled realm, but has the strength of an unparalleled realm expert? Wang Sun suddenly asked with a doubtful tone. In fact, it was not only Wang Sun who was doubtful. Feng Wuhen and Xia Yongxuan also had doubts in their hearts. Kong Lu had found them and explained the situation, but they were still skeptical. Kong Lu, let's make this clear first. If the situation is not what you said, I will withdraw, Feng Wuhen said unhurriedly. His tone had a very unique charm, like a cool breeze. Xia Yongxuan didn't say anything. However, his decision was the same as Feng Wuhen's, as they had already discussed this with Kong Lu before they had come. After all, the imperial dynasty wasn't some small sect or power. It was an extremely ancient and powerful force. Just the Battle King alone was enough to defeat all of them and kill them all. Becoming enemies with the imperial dynasty wasn't a wise choice. However, they had all been oppressed by the imperial dynasty before, and it wasn't an ordinary kind of oppression. Hence, there was a deep conflict between them and the imperial dynasty. Because they couldn't fight back, they had no choice but to live in seclusion. This time they were persuaded by Kong Lu to come out, but they just wanted to take a look at the situation. If it was like what Kong Lu said and Chumu really had such luck, then maybe it wasn't impossible for them to fight against the imperial dynasty. As long as they were careful, there would definitely be a chance. But if not, they could only retreat and hide once more. Don't worry. I, Kong Lu, am not someone who speaks nonsense. Kong Lu said unhurriedly. As soon as he finished speaking, Wang Sun's figure rapidly faded. In the blink of an eye, he seemed to have melted into the air and disappeared. Chu Mu suddenly felt a sense of danger. His figure flickered, and the finger that he had pointed out from the side suddenly missed. Before he could retract it, Chu Mu also pointed out with his finger. It was like a sword light shooting through the sky. Wang Sun's figure was faintly discernible. He quickly dodged, causing Chu Mu's finger to miss. Then he reappeared at his original spot. From Wang Sun's disappearance to Chu Mu being attacked, to Chu Mu's failure to counterattack, and Wang Sun's figure reappearing at his original spot, the entire process was completed in just a breath's time. However, Feng Wuhan, Xia Yongxuan, Kong Lu, and Lei Ba saw everything clearly. Because of this, they were all extremely shocked. Brother Chu, your strength. Kong Lu's eyes widened, and he could not help but exclaim. To be able to make him, who had always been calm, lose his composure, it was enough to show the shock that Chu Mu had brought to him. Feng Wuhan, Xia Yongxuan, Lei Ba, and Wang Sun all stared at Chu Mu with burning gazes. They looked as if they could not wait to see through Chu Mu completely and see through all his secrets. My sudden attack is difficult to defend against, even for someone of the same strength as me. Not only did you avoid it, you even managed to counterattack in an instant. Wang Sun exclaimed. Your strength is definitely not as simple as the ordinary first refinement. Wang Sun was not an expert in direct combat, but he was quite accomplished in the path of assassination. If an expert of the same level was caught off guard and faced with his assassination, they would definitely die. Even if they were prepared, there was an 80 to 90% chance that they would still die. Even if it was an expert who was one level higher than him, if they were caught off guard, they would still be killed by him. No one had told Chu Mu about his sudden attack. Although it was just a test and he did not use his full strength, it was enough to deal with a first refinement expert. However, Chu Mu was able to quickly avoid it and counterattack. Such strength was just as Wang Sun had said. It was not as simple as the ordinary first refinement expert. Chu Mu, is it true that your cultivation has not reached the level of a peerless? Feng Wuhan asked. It was not that he did not believe it, but it was too unbelievable. Throughout the history of the Deep Blue world, there had never been a cultivator who had not reached the level of a peerless, yet had unparalleled strength. Even some of the monsters who had dominated through the ages had the ability to escape from an ordinary first refinement expert when they were at the limit of the saint level. This was enough to shock countless people, and it was enough to be recorded in the history of the Deep Blue world. Chu Mu also knew that these people would join forces with him to fight against the imperial court. It was inevitable that he would be a little weak alone. Therefore, he did not feel angry at Feng Wuhan's doubts. He only released his own Yuanli aura, which was the aura of his true cultivation, the pinnacle of 9 stars. I really have not reached the level of a first refinement expert. How can you be so strong? Other than my Yuan Li cultivation reaching the pinnacle of 9 stars, my saint body cultivation has also reached the pinnacle of 9 stars, Chu Mu said. Even so, it only allows your strength to be invincible in the saint level. It is impossible for you to reach the level of a first refinement expert, Feng Wuhan said, looking as if he could not understand it. Haha, monsters cannot be judged with common sense. Lei Ba laughed. Moreover, you are a monster with great luck. Everyone could only agree with Lei Ba's words. Indeed, since ancient times, as long as a cultivator with great luck didn't die midway, their achievements would be extraordinary. Moreover, this was a heaven-defying monster with great luck. If that is the case, the actual situation is better than what Kong Lu said. I agree, Feng Wuhan said. I agree too. Xia Yongxuan nodded. Being on the same side as someone with great luck would more or less be affected by the other party's luck. It would be harder for one to die, and the chances of getting fortuitous encounters would also be increased. Under such circumstances, if they combined their strength, they might be able to deal with the imperial court. There were 10 kings in the imperial court, but currently the warlord was in power. The other 9 kings were in seclusion. Unless it was absolutely necessary, the warlord would not let the other 9 kings appear. That would mean that the warlord had failed. In the imperial court, his power and status would be severely affected, and he would be at the bottom. It would be very disadvantageous for him. As long as the warlord did not attack, they would not be afraid of the imperial court. Taking a step back, even if the warlord attacked, as long as they stayed far away, the warlord alone would not be able to defeat them all. As long as they were alive, they would have a chance. 3 years ago, Chu Mu was able to kill the imperial court's Zhan Wushuang and Zhan Wuming. Now that his strength has increased, he should be able to fight against those at the peak of the first refining, or even the peak of the first refining, Wang Sun said. He had personally tested Chu Mu's strength and came to a conclusion. The others agreed with Wang Sun's conclusion. Regarding this, Chu Mu could only agree. Originally, he wanted to release the aura of the peak of the initial stage of the second refining, but now that everyone agreed, he decided to forget about it. Since no one wants to back out, then let's form an alliance and fight against the imperial court, Kong Lu said. I agree, but to form an alliance and advance together, we have to swear an oath to the heavens, Feng Wuhan said. Feng Wuhan added, friends were friends, and relationships were relationships. It was necessary to swear an oath to the heavenly Tao. Only then could one feel at ease. Otherwise, in the face of benefits or life and death crises, it was not impossible for brothers to turn against each other. To form an alliance, we have to have a corresponding name, Lei Ba suggested. In my opinion, the reason why we can gather together and fight against the imperial court is because of Brother Chu Mu. So, let's let Brother Chu Mu decide the name of the alliance, Kong Lu suggested. Okay, Feng Wuhan shrugged and said indifferently. No problem, Wang Sun said. Said Wang Sunday Xia Yongxuan didn't have any objections. They weren't greedy for fame and fortune. It didn't make much of a difference who came up with a name. Of course, if it was someone else who wasn't as strong as them, they might not agree. After all, the strong were respected. However, Chu Mu was different. As Kong Lu said, they had gathered together because of Chu Mu. To a certain extent, they had to borrow Chu Mu's great luck. Since that's the case, I won't be polite, Yi Fuqian said. His true strength was probably the strongest among them, so he didn't reject it. After thinking for a while, Chu Mu said, the alliance will be called the Ancient Sword Alliance. What do you all think? Ancient Sword Alliance. Chu Mu's earliest origin was the ancient sword continent. Then he entered the ancient god world. This name was also a form of sustenance. Ancient Sword Alliance. Let's call it the Ancient Sword Alliance, Feng Wuhan said. He was a sword cultivator, so the name Ancient Sword Alliance was not bad. Since Feng Wuhan didn't have any objections, the others didn't either. The name of the alliance was decided. Chapter 1930. Oaths to the heavenly way were very effective. Once broken, one would definitely suffer a backlash. If it was light, one's primordial spirit would be severely injured, and one wouldn't be able to recover without 100 years or even longer. If it was heavy, one would die on the spot. Hence, to cultivators, the biggest oath was the Heavenly Way oath. No one was willing to break it. Everyone swore the Heavenly Way oath and formed the Ancient Sword Alliance. Currently, the Ancient Sword Alliance didn't have a leader. It was just a preliminary organization and wasn't complete yet. Who would be the leader of the alliance was a huge problem. It had nothing to do with fame and fortune. The leader of the alliance would have a greater say in the alliance, but at the same time he would have to shoulder greater responsibilities. The purpose of the Ancient Sword Alliance was to fight against the imperial dynasty. If they failed, the alliance would naturally disband. Hence, it didn't matter if there was a leader or not. There were a total of 6 members in the Ancient Sword Alliance. Feng Wuheng was at the peak of the second refinement. Xia Yongxuan was at the advanced stage of the second refinement. Kong Lu and Lei Ba were at the intermediate stage of the second refinement. Wang Sun was at the initial stage of the second refinement, and the last person was Chu Mu, who was considered to be at the peak of the first refinement. An alliance formed by 6 peerless cultivators, 5 of whom were at the second refinement. Such an alliance was undoubtedly very powerful. The Ancient Sword Alliance has been formed. Now, we should discuss how to deal with the imperial dynasty, said Wang Sunday. According to the information we have, the imperial dynasty has 10 kings. 9 of them are in seclusion. Now, the war king is in charge. He's at the third refinement, but we don't know which level he is at. Kong Lu said slowly, the war king has 5 heavenly generals. Currently, the 3rd heavenly general is dead. The 4th and 5th heavenly generals died under Chu Mu's sword. Only the 1st and 2nd heavenly generals are left. The 1st heavenly general is at the intermediate stage of the second refinement, while the 2nd is at the initial stage of the second refinement. If the 2 of them work together, they can reach the peak of the intermediate stage of the second refinement, but they can't fight against us. After a pause, everyone listened to Kong Lu. Apart from that, the War King of the Imperial Dynasty has 9 Saint-level battle envoys. There are more than 1,000 of them. They can set up a battle formation, and its power can threaten a second refinement peerless cultivator. However, as long as you don't fall into the enemy's battle formation, you won't be in any danger. Although the Imperial Court battle formation was very powerful, it had some flaws. It wasn't flexible enough. If the peerless experts didn't fight it and focused on dodging, there was nothing they could do. Therefore, the battle formation set up by the Imperial Court battle envoys wasn't much of a threat to them. I think that the Imperial Dynasty's strength should be more than this. Feng Wuhan said, the 10 kings each have their own subordinates. However, when each king is in power, the other 9 kings would enter seclusion to cultivate. Their loyal subordinates would also enter seclusion to cultivate. At the peak of the royal clan, including the 10 kings, there were over 60 supreme experts. However, they weren't as strong as before. Kong Lu continued, 60 peerless experts. Such a number was extremely terrifying. Among all the forces of the human race, they were definitely at the top. Even the Kanglan Empire or the 4 great sects of the ancient heaven domain, which were also established by Saint Emperors, could not be compared to them. However, the royal clan was different from other sections. The 10 kings took turns to be in power. Each king had a group of supreme experts and 9-star saint-level experts. Once they entered seclusion, the experts under them would also enter seclusion. They didn't interfere with each other. Therefore, under normal circumstances, the royal clan's strength was only 1/10 of its peak, but it was still very shocking. 1/3 refinement war king, 2 second refinement heaven generals, and 3 first refinement heaven generals. Such strength was something that most sects in the deep blue world couldn't compare to. For example, the Luo River True Palace was a famous sect in the deep blue world. In the sect, there was only 1 supreme expert, and he was only at the first refinement. That was also why no one was willing to provoke the royal clan. Now, the few supreme experts who had been hunted down by the royal clan all came out. With Chu Mu as the core, they formed the Ancient Sword Alliance. If they wanted to fight against the royal clan, they had to have a deeper understanding of the royal clan. According to what I know in the royal clan, other than the 10 kings and their heaven generals, there is also a very secret group of experts. It seems to be formed by supreme experts, but I don't know how many there are and how strong they are. Xia Yongxuan spoke in a sad tone. This was his way of speaking. Unknowingly, it would affect others. If it was someone who was weaker than him, or if they wasn't strong enough, they would be affected and feel an indescribable sadness. However, although some of them weren't as strong as him, they could still resist it. This was also related to the fact that Xia Yongshuan didn't intentionally trigger the sadness. Hearing Xia Yongshuan's words, everyone was shocked. When the first Heaven General Zhan Wukong and the second Heaven General Zhan Wuing died, their life tablets in the royal clan shattered. Very soon, the War King found out. The 5 Heaven Generals are dead. Ji Shi, can you calculate who killed them? The War King's expression didn't change at all. He was very calm, but Ji Shi knew very well how angry the War King was and how strong his killing intent was. Let me calculate, Ji Shi said, and took out a tortoiseshell compass. With the help of the compass, he immediately started calculating. The turtle-shell compass trembled, and the patterns on its back lit up one by one. After all of them lit up, the turtle-shell compass stopped trembling. Ji Shi's hands kept moving, forming complicated hand seals, all of which hit the turtle-shell compass. Immediately after, light appeared on the turtle-backed compass. As it moved, it seemed to form a small world. Scenery began to appear between the heavens and earth. Gradually, the figure of a person seemed to be about to appear, but an unexpected force attacked it. The figure instantly dissipated, the small world collapsed, and the light disappeared. The turtle-backed compass trembled, and its aura suddenly dropped. I failed. Ji Shi stared at the tortoiseshell compass in a daze. His eyes were filled with disbelief. After a short rest, he calculated again, but the result was the same. After failing 3 times in a row, Ji Shi gave up. Your Excellency, the War King, the person who killed the 1st and 2nd Heaven Generals, has a treasure that can seal the mysteries of the heavens. Or maybe he's very good at calculating and can hide from the mysteries of the heavens. Ji Shi said, Ji Shi, please calculate Chu Mu. The War King thought for a moment and then said, Chu Mu. Ji Shi heard this and thought for a moment before his eyes lit up. Immediately, he started calculating again. The result of the calculation was a failure. This time, Ji Shi calculated 3 times in a row. His face was pale and his eyes were filled with exhaustion. After 6 consecutive calculations, he had used up almost all of his mental strength. Even Chu Mu can't calculate. The person who killed Zhan Wukong and Zhan Wuing is most likely Chu Mu, said the War King. Your Excellency, the War King, that's not very likely. Ji Shi said, 3 years ago, Chu Mu was only at the 1st refinement. After 3 years, he was able to kill a 2nd refinement cultivator and a middle 2nd refinement cultivator at that. It was impossible. I also don't think it's possible, but my intuition tells me that the person who killed them is Chu Mu, said the War King. His eyes were filled with coldness. Your Excellency, the War King, if it's really Chu Mu. Ji Shi couldn't finish his sentence. When he thought that it was really Chu Mu who killed Zhan Wukong and Zhan Wuing, he couldn't help but feel cold. Even though he was one of the higher-ups of the imperial dynasty, his identity didn't make him feel safe, because this speed of growth was too terrifying. If they didn't get rid of him as soon as possible, he would bring disaster to the imperial dynasty. Send a message to the Sky Clan. Tell them that Chu Mu has reached the 2nd refinement. The Battle King seemed to be speaking to the air. Shortly after, there seemed to be a slight fluctuation in the air. The Battle King stood up and strode down from his throne. He walked towards the back of the palace and continued to move downwards. Very soon, he entered the belly of the mountain. He took out a command medallion. Rays of light shot out from it and landed on the pitch-black door. The door gently trembled, as if it had not been opened for a very long time. Following the trembling, an ancient rumbling sound rang out, and the door slowly opened a crack for the War King to pass through. After entering, the door closed on its own. With a bang, it was as if the entire world was shaking. Pitch black, there was only pitch-black darkness. The War King's eyes shone brightly. He could vaguely see many people sitting cross-legged, not moving at all. I am the War King, one of the 10 kings of the Imperial Dynasty. This time, the Imperial Dynasty has encountered a strong enemy. My 5 celestial generals have all died in battle. The enemy's potential is shocking, and his growth is extremely fast. He will affect the safety of the Imperial Dynasty. I, the War King, use my authority as the Emperor to ask everyone to help me get rid of this enemy. The War King raised a golden badge in his hand. On the front of the badge there was an extremely ancient word, Emperor. As you wish. Tell us everything about the enemy. My Imperial Guards will move out. After a long time, an extremely old voice sounded out. It sounded weak and powerless, as if it could die at any moment. However, when the War King heard that voice, his expression changed. This was an extremely terrifying cultivator. Many years ago, he had already reached the 3rd refinement. Now, who knew how strong he was? Following the sound of that voice, a weak qi, as if awakening, permeated the air. Being within the qi, Zhan Wang instantly felt a sense of pressure. Even a peerless cultivator like him, who had practiced the 3rd refinement, could feel the pressure. How terrifying was that qi! When the Battle King spoke, he immediately told them everything related to Chu Mu. He didn't add any details because the Imperial Guards would naturally determine the threat level of the enemy. After a short while, the old voice sounded out again. 18, 17, 16, 15. The 4 of you go and kill Chu Mu. Yes. 4 voices sounded out in unison. Their voices were extremely cold. The War King couldn't help but shiver. Chapter 1931. Cloud Heaven City. High up in the air, towering over all living things, overlooking the millions of years of changes that had taken place throughout the lands. No matter how the tides of time battered it, it would not decay or decay, existing for all eternity, never changing. What? Chu Mu is not dead. The elders of the celestial race were shocked when they received the news from the imperial court. 3 years ago, the captain of the Divine Guard, Tian Daoji, returned and said that Chu Mu was attacked by his heavenly Dao judgment and fell into a black hole. He would definitely die. Tian Jizi also confirmed this, and the celestial race thought that the crisis was over. Now, only 3 years had passed, and they received news that Chu Mu was not dead. Moreover, this news came from the imperial court. Although the celestial race believed that the human race was a lowly race, the imperial court was also a powerful force that was worthy of the celestial race's attention. Soon, the elders of the celestial race asked Tian Jizi to open the heavens' secret array and calculate again. The result of the calculation made the faces of the elders of the celestial race as black as the bottom of a pot. They couldn't calculate. According to Tian Jizi, this result meant that the person was still alive. But because of some reasons, such as the other party having a treasure that could conceal heaven's secrets, it blocked his calculation. This result made the faces of the elders of the celestial race even uglier. This meant that not only was Chu Mu still alive, but he also had the ability to conceal heaven's secrets, preventing Tian Jizi from calculating his information. Under such circumstances, it would be even more difficult to find him. And the longer Chu Mu lived, the more disadvantageous it would be for the celestial race. When they thought of the blood-red sky above Cloud Heaven City back then, the elders of the celestial race couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. Send out all the Divine Guard to search for Chu Mu's traces. Once found, kill without mercy. A celestial race elder said coldly, his killing intent awe-inspiring. In addition, send out the heavenly kill order to all the races in the deep blue world. No matter who it is, whoever kills Chu Mu will have the qualifications to cultivate our celestial races, martial arts, and spiritual arts. Furthermore, they can enter our celestial races, sky, God, secret realm. In the deep blue world, the sky race's martial path and spirit arts were considered the top. This was also one of the reasons why the sky race were so strong. Naturally, many people from other races also wanted to cultivate. In addition, the God of Heaven's secret realm was a very important secret realm for the Tian clan. If one could enter it, they would definitely be able to obtain a lot of opportunities and become stronger. It was extremely attractive to experts of any race. It had to be said that in order to kill Chu Mu, the Tian clan had put in a lot of effort. Following the celestial races' heavenly kill order being issued, the powerhouses of the various races in the entire world were alarmed one after another. Who is Chu Mu? 30 years ago, he was chased into the land of exile. He was only at the early fourth heavenly layer of the immemorial realm. It's only been 30 years. Could it be that his strength has already reached the level of a peerless expert? Heavenly races, martial arts, and spiritual arts. Heavenly deity, secret realm. Haha, I'll take Chu Mu's life. Because of the heavenly races' heavenly kill order, the peerless experts of the entire continent were mobilized to search for Chu Mu's traces. All of Chu Mu's information had been dug up by someone. 33 years ago, he escaped into the land of exile. He was only at the early fourth heavenly layer of the immemorial realm. In a barren place like the land of exile, how much can he improve? At most, he's only at the 7-star saint realm. No! Since the Tian clan issued the heavenly kill order, it means that Chu Mu is still quite a threat to them. Therefore, I feel that he's not only at the 7-star saint realm, but also at the 9-star saint realm. Who knows, he might even be a peerless expert. This sentence was naturally mostly a joke. Originally, very few people knew that Chu Mu had returned to the deep blue world from the land of exile. Now that the Tian clan issued the heavenly kill order, the entire continent knew about it. In the Azure Water Dynasty's true sword sect, from the elders to the disciples, when they found out that not only was their sect master alive, but he had also returned to the deep blue world from the land of exile, they were all overjoyed and their morale was greatly boosted. However, when they found out that the Tian clan had issued the heavenly kill order, they were also extremely worried. However, in these 33 years, their strength had increased by leaps and bounds, but they were still unable to help Chu Mu in any way, because it was still not enough. Sect Master has turned danger into safety time and time again. I believe that this time he will be able to safely pass through it as well. Therefore, what everyone needs to do is to cultivate in peace, work hard, and do our best to increase our own strength and increase the strength of our true sword sect. If our true sword sect is extremely powerful enough to make the Tian clan fear us, would they still dare to issue a heavenly kill order to the sect master? An elder said. The true sword sect immediately set off a frenzy of cultivation. The situation isn't good. After Wang's son, who was in charge of scouting for information, returned, he looked at Chu Mu with a strange expression and quickly said, "What does it have to do with Chu Mu?" Kong Lu immediately asked. There is indeed a relationship, a very direct relationship. Wang's son smiled bitterly and said, the Tian clan issued the heavenly kill order, notifying the experts of various races in the continent that anyone who kills Chu Mu can cultivate the Tian clan's martial arts and spiritual techniques, and can also enter the Tianshan secret realm. Now, those experts are like crazy, looking everywhere for Chu Mu's traces. Once they find him, thinking of that kind of result, even though no one was afraid, they still felt their scalps tingle. In the entire deep blue world, the number of peerless experts of a human clan was very low compared to Saint Realm experts. However, the lifespan of peerless experts was very long. It was very easy for them to live for 100,000 years. Therefore, since ancient times, there were at least 1,000 peerless experts in the human clan on the surface. As for how many were in the dark, it was unknown. In the deep blue world, the human clan was not the only major race. For example, the Sea clan was not inferior to the human clan in terms of numbers. In addition, the number of peerless experts in the Sea clan was slightly higher than the human clan. In addition, Other races, such as the Five Spirit Clan, also had some peerless experts. However, no matter what race it was, there was a clear gap in talent between them and the Tian clan. For a long time, the gap in talent gradually created a gap in other aspects. Therefore, the experts of the other races were very envious of the Tian clan's martial arts and spiritual techniques, especially the Tianshan secret realm. It was a very important secret realm for the Tian clan. Not only were there various treasures inside, there were also the martial arts and spiritual technique inheritance of the Tian clan. Therefore, a portion of the peerless experts of the various races in the deep blue world were mobilized. There were at least a few hundred of them. Being targeted by hundreds of peerless experts wasn't good news at all. I'm already considering whether or not to withdraw from the ancient Sword Alliance. Feng Wuhan shook his head. This was naturally a joke. I now regret making the heavenly oath. Otherwise, I would find a chance to secretly kill Chumu. The Tian clan's martial arts can be comprehended by me, and I can even enter the Tianshan secret realm. Wang Sun sighed, looking very regretful. This was a joke, but it was also a half-truth. However, it also showed how attractive the Tian clan's martial arts and the Tianshan secret realm were to the peerless experts. The Tian clan will not allow their martial arts and spiritual techniques to be spread out, Xia Yongshuan said calmly, causing everyone's expression to change slightly. Yes, with the Tian clan's tyranny and strength, once one cultivated their martial arts and spiritual techniques, they would definitely become a member of the Tian clan. If they became a member of the Tian clan, it would be fine. However, the problem was that they were not from the Tian clan. In the end, they could only become puppets controlled by the Tian clan. Which expert would be willing to become someone's puppet? Their life and death would be controlled by someone else. The joke ends here. Right now, the outside world is in a state of panic. Once Chumu appears, he will definitely be surrounded. The situation is not good for us. In addition, the Tian clan will also send experts to search for Chumu's whereabouts. The Imperial clan will not give up either. It can be said that we have many enemies, Kong Lu said calmly. They formed the ancient Sword Alliance to fight against the Imperial dynasty. They would advance and retreat together. They had to face the current situation together. This was part of the content of the Heavenly Oath. Right now, the strongest person in the ancient Sword Alliance is Wuhan. He is at the peak of the second refinement. This is not enough. He needs to be even stronger. At the very least, he needs to be at the third refinement. Kong Lu continued, the third refinement is easier said than done. Everyone couldn't help but sigh. The difference between the third refinement and the peak of the second refinement was not big. Actually, the difference was huge. Many peerless experts were unable to break through to the third refinement. Also, Chu Mu's strength is at the first refinement. If he can reach the second refinement, it will be even more beneficial for us. Kong Lu's eyes shone brightly. I know of a secret realm. Perhaps if we enter it, we will be able to obtain an opportunity to improve our strength. Even if we can't reach the third refinement, we might be able to obtain some treasures that will be enough to protect our lives against third refinement powerhouses. If that's really the case, then we really have the ability to fight against the Imperial clan. Everyone's eyes lit up. There's no time to lose. Let's go to the secret realm now, Kong Lu said. Kong Lu had discovered the secret realm more than 10 years ago. He had also entered and obtained some benefits. However, the enemies in the secret realm were too strong. With his strength, he could only explore the outer regions of the secret realm. He couldn't enter the secret realm at all. Even so, the benefits he obtained from the outer regions of the secret realm had increased his strength. He had originally planned to enter the secret realm again after his strength had increased. Perhaps his strength would allow him to enter deeper and obtain more benefits. He would continue to increase his strength and break through to the third refinement. However, the current situation forced him to make other choices. Perhaps It would be better to explore the secret realm together with a group of allies who had made the heavenly oath. After all, if they worked together, their strength would increase further. Perhaps they could enter the secret realm and obtain more benefits. At that time, everyone's strength would increase, and they would have a greater chance of fighting against the Imperial clan. Chapter 1932. For streaks of light flashed across the Imperial Court's mountain. Their target was the Heavenly Dragon Domain. The speed of these 4 streaks of light was extremely fast, completely comparable to the speed of a high-level second refinement expert. The aura they emitted also had a strange fluctuation, as if they were between life and death. It was frightening. They were the Imperial Guards that had always existed secretly in the Imperial Court. Their full name was the Imperial Guards. They didn't accept the direct command of the 10 Kings. Only those with the Imperial Medallion could mobilize them. The Imperial Medallion was a medallion passed down by the founder of the Imperial Court. Even peerless experts couldn't destroy it. The 10 Kings of the Imperial Court would each hold the Imperial Medallion and have a chance to mobilize the Imperial Guards. However, whether or not the Imperial Guards would be mobilized was up to the commander of the Imperial Guards. Only when they felt that the Imperial Court was truly threatened would they appear and eliminate the threat. When one of the 10 Kings used the Imperial Medallion, it usually meant that the situation had developed to a point where it was out of control. Unless the king personally took action, there was no way to resolve the situation. As the Imperial Guards, nurtured by the Sacred Emperor, each one of them possessed terrifying strength. They weren't afraid of death, and it was difficult for them to die. Their life form had already changed, and they were different from humans. Therefore, the Imperial Guards had another name, the Immortal Imperial Guards. In the era when the Holy Emperor was in power, the Immortal Royal Guards were extremely ferocious. Countless people trembled in fear when they heard their name. However, after many years, they had already quieted down. Those who knew about the Immortal Royal Guards were either dead or in seclusion. With the divine sealing compass, Chumu's heavenly secrets were concealed. No matter how proficient he was in the art of divination, as long as he hadn't reached the level of a sacred emperor, he wouldn't be able to divine Chumu's whereabouts. For a moment, Chumu was safe. Even the wind-whispering tower, which was known to have information all over the world, relied on divination in many situations. When divination was useless, it was even harder for them to determine Chumu's whereabouts. This caused the hundreds of experts who had their eyes on Chumu to be like headless flies. The deep blue world was actually very big. Unless one was a sacred emperor, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Under Kong Lu's lead, the 6 people from the Ancient Sword Alliance quickly left the Heavenly Dragon Domain. After spending more than a month, they entered a small domain, the Heavenly Mountain Domain. The Sky Mountain Domain was located in a remote area, and the chi of heaven and earth was relatively thin. Therefore, other than the appearance of a peerless expert hundreds of thousands of years ago, no other peerless experts had appeared. The strongest expert in the Sky Mountain Domain was the Taishan Lord of the Sky Mountain Palace, the #1 sect in the Sky Mountain Domain. He was at the peak of the 9-star saint level. That secret realm is in the Heavenly Mountain, where the Heavenly Mountain Palace is located, said Kong Lu. Heavenly Mountain was the territory of the Heavenly Mountain Hall. To think that there was a secret realm in their territory that even second refinement cultivators would flock to. Yet the Heavenly Mountain Hall did not know about it. It was as if they were sitting on a treasure mountain without knowing it. Of course, even if the Heavenly Mountain Palace knew about the existence of the mystic realm, they wouldn't be able to gain anything from it. After all, the most powerful person in the Heavenly Mountain Palace was only at the pinnacle of the saint realm. At best, he was at the level of a bright moon sword saint. The 6 of them were all peerless experts with extraordinary means. They easily avoided the patrolling disciples of the Heavenly Mountain Palace and entered the Heavenly Mountain. There was a hidden cave there. After several turns, Kong Lu and the others stopped. In front of them was an uneven black stone wall. It didn't seem to be anything unusual. The entrance to the secret realm is here. Kong Lu pointed ahead and said. Immediately he formed seals with both hands. Waves of space power appeared and turned into transparent handprints that flew out and landed on the black stone wall in front of them. Under the hundreds of handprints, Kong Lu's expression was solemn. There was sweat on his forehead. It was obvious that he had used up a lot of energy. The stone wall began to change. It was as if there was a layer of invisible power that started from the center and slowly spread out in all directions. Back then, I did my best to leave a space seal on this stone wall in order to protect it. Even if someone accidentally enters here, they won't find out. After Kong Lu withdrew his hand, he explained, Of course, if someone's attainment in sealing is higher than mine, it will be difficult to protect it. This possibility was almost impossible. When Kong Lu laid down the seal, he was only at the early stage of the second refinement and had used all his strength to lay it down. The Tianshan domain was just a small, remote domain with thin heaven-earth yuan-chi. Very few experts would come here. Even if there were, they were mostly just passing by. As the airflow was unsealed, everyone began to sense the extraordinariness of the stone wall. A faintly discernible fluctuation of aura was constantly being emitted. It was extremely obscure. Wait until I recover my strength. Then I'll lay down another layer of seal to prevent others from disturbing us, said Kong Lu. He was very cautious. No one had any objections. Although Chu Mu was also proficient in the path of sealing, it had been a very long time since he had cultivated it. Thus, his attainments in the path of sealing were far inferior to Kong Lu's. When Kong Lu set up the seals, Chu Mu was also carefully watching and taking the opportunity to comprehend some things from them. After everything was done, everyone turned around and faced the black stone wall. Let's go. Kong Lu had entered the secret realm before. He had experience, so he took the lead. Taking a step forward, Kong Lu's body disappeared into the pitch-black stone wall as if he had entered water. Everyone quickly followed him. The scene before them changed. Traces of coldness invaded their bodies, making them feel a little cold. A breath ago, they were still in front of the black stone wall. In the next breath, they were in a white world. The white snow seemed to be boundless as far as the eye could see. It was so cold that everyone felt a trace of coldness. One had to know that they were all peerless experts. Even if Chu Mu wasn't one, he still had the strength of a peerless expert. Cold and heat couldn't invade him. From this, one could see how shocking the coldness of this place was. This place is definitely very suitable for cultivators of ice attribute cultivation techniques, said Lei Ba with a smile. Some special cultivation techniques often required special environments to be cultivated to Deshang's level or even to the Great Circle. Of course, even if it was a relatively ordinary cultivation technique, one could still obtain great benefits in a suitable environment. Perhaps the owner of this secret realm cultivated a special and powerful ice attribute cultivation technique, which caused the secret realm to be in this state, said Feng Wuhan. A special environment could create a powerful cultivation technique, and a special cultivation technique could also create a special environment. The two were actually interconnected. None of us are ice attribute cultivators. Such an environment is not only not beneficial to us, it will even hinder our exploration of the secret realm, said Kong Lu. This is only the periphery of the secret realm. The deeper we go into the secret realm, the colder it will be. In the end, it will even affect our strength. Hearing Kong Lu's words, everyone couldn't help but be shocked. Now they only felt a slight chill, but they didn't take to heart. This was because even if the chill was 10 times heavier, it wouldn't affect their strength. However, from what Kong Lu said, the chill behind them was heavy enough to affect their strength. What kind of chill was this? Even the most powerful saint-level cultivator would be frozen in an instant when faced with such a chill, extinguishing all vitality. Of course, Chu Mu was an exception. He was an exception, so no one could equate him with saint-level cultivators. More than 10 years ago, I was still at the beginner stage of second refining. It was precisely because I entered this secret realm that I obtained some treasures in the periphery that my strength rose from the beginner stage of second refining to the intermediate stage of second refining in just over 10 years. This speed of improvement is beyond my expectations, said Kong Lu. Immediately, as if he had thought of something, he glanced at Chu Mu and said, "Special circumstances don't count." Everyone let out good-natured laughter. Compared to Chu Mu, they were simply looking for trouble. However, the growth of a monstrous genius who possessed great fortune and incomparably shocking talent could not be viewed with common sense. Chu Mu didn't say anything. He just pretended to smile bitterly and was very cooperative. Well, time waits for no one. Let's go deeper into the secret realm as soon as possible, said Kong Lu. This was because more than 10 years ago, although he had obtained benefits in the periphery of the secret realm, it had taken him more than 10 years to rise from the beginner stage of second refining to the intermediate stage of second refining. If he wanted to be faster, he naturally had to go deeper into the secret realm and obtain better treasures. The 6 of them all had the strength of peerless experts. They quickly moved forward. Suddenly, a strange sound was heard. In the distance, there was an astonishing chill gathering, and the fluctuations were strong. "It's the Ice Demon Man," Kong Lu said. "The Ice Devil Man is a special existence in the periphery of the secret realm, just like the guards of the secret realm. It has the strength of a peerless expert, and its cold aura is astonishing. There may be ice chalcedony in its body. After taking it, it can further refine its strength and slowly improve its strength. Back then, I obtained enough frigid jade essence and refined it to improve my strength." In the end, Kong Lu added, "These frost demons don't have any weaknesses. Only by smashing their bodies with great power can they be killed. Otherwise, they will absorb the coldness of the secret realm to replenish themselves." As Kong Lu spoke, figures appeared in the distance. Each figure was about 2 meters tall. They had a head, 2 arms, a torso, and 2 legs. They looked like humans, but their bodies were pale ice blue. There were also countless deep ice blue dots on their bodies, exuding an incomparably astonishing chill. The eyes of the Ice Demon Man were deep ice blue. They were cold and ruthless, with a hint of brutality. Seeing Chu Mu and the other 5, the group of Ice Demon Man suddenly let out an astonishing roar and rushed over. Chapter 1933. The Frost Devils ran at an extremely fast speed. It was as if they had teleported within the ice and snow as they rapidly closed in on Chu Mu and the others. Following their roars, cold air surged forth and the northern wind whistled, causing snow to flutter. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 Frost Devils had closed in on Chu Mu and the others. The shocking cold air became even more intense. The hands of the Frost Devils looked very strange. They were different from the 5 fingers of a human. They were much thicker and had the appearance of sharp claws. They were frost claws. They quickly waved their frost claws. Biting cold air gathered between their claws and turned into claw marks that flickered with cold light. They tore through the air and clawed towards Chu Mu and the others. An attack of this level was enough to threaten an exceptional first refinement expert. "Chu Mu, be careful," Feng Wuhan said. Feng Wuhan said as he unsheathed his sword. It was as if a cool breeze was blowing around him, bringing the warmth of spring to this world of ice and snow. As he drew his sword light, the cool breeze blew past. Wherever it passed, the ice and snow seemed to melt. Under the cool breeze, the Frost Devil's frost claws were like ice and snow under the scorching sun, rapidly melting and disappearing. Among the 6 people from the Ancient Sword Alliance, Chu Mu's strength was defined as the limit of first refinement. That was the highest estimate of his strength. Therefore, more than 10 Frost Devils with the strength of first refinement already had the strength to threaten Chu Mu. The 6 of them were now allies. If conditions permitted, they would help Chu Mu. However, they would also leave some leeway for Chu Mu to display his own abilities. Other than Chu Mu, who was deemed to be at the limit of first refinement. The other 5 were at least at the middle stage of second refinement. Yes, Wang's son, who was in the state of assassination, did indeed have that kind of strength. Although there were more than 10 frost devils, their strength was only at the first refinement. They were not a match for the 6 of them at all. Feng Wuhan slashed out with his sword light. Wherever the sword light passed, 3 frost devils stopped in their tracks before disintegrating and disappearing. Xia Yongxuan's sword contained a desolate aura. That desolate aura seemed to be able to infect the surrounding environment. Even the ice and snow seemed to have an additional desolate aura. 3 frigid ice devils had died under his sword. Wang's son's figure flashed and killed 2 frost devils in a row. He dismembered them and cut them into countless pieces. Lei Ba's hands flickered with lightning as they instantly blasted out, blasting the 2 frost devils into pieces. As for Kong Lu, he could be said to be the most familiar with the frost devils. Therefore, it was easier for him to attack. Under his spatial blade, the 3 frost devils were cut into countless pieces. The last frost devil man died under Chu Mu's sword. Chu Mu did not use his full strength. That was because the strength of a mere frost devil man was only equivalent to a peak first refinement expert. To Chu Mu, such an ice devil man didn't pose any threat. However, in the eyes of others, it was different. They had personally seen Chu Mu easily kill an ice devil man with the strength of a peak first refinement initial stage. This further proved Chu Mu's strength, causing them to be even more at ease. When the dozen or so frost devils died, they directly melted and disappeared, leaving nothing behind. The probability of frigid jade essence appearing in the bodies of frost devils is very low. It's about 100 to 1. Kong Lu said, more than 10 years ago, he had killed thousands of frost devils and only managed to obtain dozens of frigid jade essences. The probability of 100 to 1 was not exaggerated at all. However, if it's a frost devil general, then every one of them would have frigid jade essence in their bodies. Frost devil general? Is it an existence of a higher level than the frost devils? Feng Wuhan asked. That's right. The strength of a frost devil man is at the first refinement. The strongest will not reach the second refinement. As for the frost devil general, the weakest will be at the early second refinement, and the strongest will be at the peak second refinement. Kong Lu said, more than 10 years ago, I planned to enter the depths of the secret realm. Unfortunately, I was unlucky and encountered a middle second refinement frost devil general. At that time, I was only at the early second refinement and could not defeat it. I could only rely on my life-saving ability to retreat. However, it's different now. Perhaps we can kill the Frost Devil General and enter the Frost Palace in the depths of the secret realm. What are you waiting for? Lei Ba said. He clenched his fists and blazing electric arcs jumped around, as if lightning was flashing and thunder was rumbling. Kong Lu had been here before, so he led the way. Under the heavenly oath, everyone was at ease. They continued to move forward. As they went deeper, the cold air became heavier, and the Frost Devil General that appeared became stronger. Middle, first refinement. Peak, first refinement. High, first refinement. Peak, first refinement. Peak, first refinement. Peak, first refinement. Peak, first refinement. After that, it was the peak, first refinement. However, whether it was the middle first refinement or the peak first refinement, they were not much of a threat to the people of the ancient Sword Alliance. Chu Mu did not even need to make a move. The 5 of them killed the Frost Devils, one by one. In this secret realm, the Frost Devils had the advantage of the environment, which increased their survival ability. However, the difference between the second refinement and the first refinement was very obvious. No matter how great the Frost Devil's advantage was, it was useless in the face of absolute power. Death was their only ending. As the group continued to kill, they began to harvest the Frost Chalcedony. The shapes of the frigid jade essence were all different. Some were irregular circles, some were prismatic, some were cylindrical, and so on. Furthermore, the frigid jade essences produced by frigid demons of different strengths were not very different in size. However, the power contained within was different. The frost chalcedony was not only suitable for cultivators of frost attribute cultivation techniques, it was also suitable for other cultivators. Absorbing and refining, it could clearly purify one's own power and better temper one's laws. It could be said that it was an extremely important cultivation resource. However, now was not the time to refine the frost chalcedony. The group first took it and kept it. They would distribute it after they left. The coldness grew heavier and heavier, and it began to affect the flow of everyone's blood to a certain extent. They had passed through the area of the frost devils and entered the area of the frost demon general. The first frost demon general appeared before everyone's eyes. The frost demon general's body was taller than the frost devil's. It was 5 meters tall, and the color of its body was deeper. Its pair of eyes were like sapphires, cold and emotionless, indifferent to the world. A powerful cold aura emanated from the frost devil general's body, sweeping in all directions. When it saw Chu Mu and the others, the frost devil general let out a roar and quickly moved over. Under its feet, a circle of light blue ripples quickly spread out. The ripples covered 100-meter radius, and the ice and snow ground froze again on top of its original foundation. Frost demonic ring. This was the innate ability of the frost demon general. It could produce a shocking chill that was several times stronger than the chill in the environment. It directly affected the flow of everyone's blood and qi, and affected the flexibility of their bodies, causing them to be unable to use their full strength. Brother Chu Mu, you stay behind us. Lei Ba's body flashed, and he turned into a bolt of lightning that rapidly blasted towards the frost demon general. Unknowingly, a pair of purple fists had appeared in Lei Ba's hands. There were countless arcs of lightning dancing on the fists. In an instant, Lei Ba rapidly closed in on the frost demon general and entered the range of the frost demonic ring. Frost rapidly spread out from his body, and his speed dropped significantly. With a low roar, a terrifying power burst out. Lightning flowed around his body, dispersing the frost. His speed increased again, and he closed in on the frost demon general. Both of his fists struck out continuously, and it was as if lightning had broken through the sky, chasing after the frost demon general's body. With 2 bangs, the frost demon general's body trembled, and it was forced to retreat. 2 holes were formed on its body, and lightning flowed around. However, under the frost demonic ring, a large amount of chill was absorbed and injected into the frost demon general's body, causing the 2 holes on its body to heal rapidly. Just as Kong Lu had said, it was impossible to kill the frost demon general without destroying it directly. It could be said that this frost demon general, who was only at the initial second refining, was very difficult to deal with. Its survivability was above that of a middle second refining expert, and was comparable to a peak middle second refining expert. In addition, it had the ability to recover rapidly, which made it even more difficult to deal with. Lei Ba's power burst out once again, and he performed a powerful killing move. Lightning was like a prison, and a terrifying power covered the frost demon general's body. It flowed up and down and wantonly destroyed everything. Under this attack, the frost demon general's body was torn to pieces, and it was finally killed. After killing the initial second refining frost demon general, Lei Ba seemed to have fought a great battle and had used up 20% of his strength. The road ahead will not be easy, Lei Ba said with a grave expression. Lei Ba's expression was grave as he spoke. He held a piece of cold ice jade essence in his hand. It was larger than the cold ice demon man's, and the energy contained within it was several times more majestic. The others also nodded their heads. Although the battle between Lei Ba and the icy demon general had ended in a very short period of time, with their eyesight they were able to see many things. Therefore, they understood that it would be very difficult to advance on the path to the icy palace. Chu-mu, why don't you stay here first? Feng Wuhan said. Soon after, he shook his head. It's not good to stay here either. We might encounter the Frost Demon Man or the Frost Demon General at any time. It's better for you to advance with us. If things don't work out, our goal will be to obtain the Frost Jade Essence, Kong Lu said. Even though entering the Frost Palace was extremely attractive to them, everything had to be based on the actual situation. Maybe we'll be lucky and enter the Frost Palace, Chu-mu said with a smile. Then we'll count on your auspicious words, the others said with a smile. In order to maintain the speed of their advance, whenever they encountered the Frost Demon General, at least 2 people would attack and try to kill it as quickly as possible to obtain the frigid chalcedony. As long as they obtained the frigid chalcedony, the Frost Demon General would have no hope of recovery. Otherwise, even if it was shattered, the frigid chalcedony would still be there. As time passed, it would absorb the cold air and eventually recover. Gradually, the outline of a palace appeared in everyone's sight. Chapter 1934. The outline of the ice palace was right in front of everyone's eyes. It was as if it was right in front of them. Everyone's eyes lit up with hope and anticipation. They didn't feel any pressure when they passed through the Frost Devil Man's area. But when they entered the Frost Devil General's area, the pressure kept increasing. From the initial Frost Devil General at the beginning to the peak of the Frost Devil General at the beginning, to the middle of the second refinement, and then to the peak of the middle of the second refinement. And now they had just killed a Frost Devil General at the high of the second refinement. In terms of absolute strength, the high second refinement Frost Demon General was actually not that strong and was at the normal level. However, the might of its Frost Demon Ring was astonishing. Even experts like Wang Sun and Lei Ba would be clearly affected by it and had to maintain a state of full power in order to resist it. Airflow was also clearly affected, but he seemed to have a treasure on him that could resist the cold. Therefore, he had an easier time than Lei Ba and Wang Sunday. As for Xia Yongxuan and Feng Wuhan, they were the strongest and had an easier time resisting it. However, the advanced second refining Frost Demon General's survivability was even more shocking. Its body was incomparably tough and difficult to destroy. As long as it wasn't completely destroyed, it could quickly recover. Killing the advanced second refining Frost Demon General was the result of everyone working together except for Chu-mu. In a one-on-one situation, even Feng Wuhan couldn't destroy it in a short period of time. Even though the silhouette of the ice palace was already in everyone's eyes, and even though everyone's hearts were filled with anticipation, they were also very clear that the ice demon generals they would encounter in the following journey might be even stronger. An advanced second refinement Frost Demon General was already very troublesome for them. If it was a peak second refinement Frost Demon General, it would be even more difficult to deal with. As for a peak second refinement Frost Demon General, or even an extreme second refinement Frost Demon General, thinking of this, everyone's hearts couldn't help but feel heavy. It was a heavy feeling of worry. The ice palace was clearly right in front of them, but they couldn't enter because they weren't strong enough. That sort of feeling was extremely unbearable. After regaining their strength, everyone moved forward again. Chu-mu, because he was the weakest, walked at the back. As everyone expected, a peak second refinement Frost Demon General appeared before everyone's eyes. Moreover, it rapidly rushed over and roared. A frightening chilliness spread out and surged forward. Flying snow drifted down and sprinkled down. It was endless and endless, turning the place into a world of snow. The ice claws tore through the sky, and the shadows of the claws covered the sky. Countless cold air swept up and attacked everyone from all directions. Breeze and moon soared. Feng Wuhan's body moved, and everyone felt as if the snowy sky had changed. Night fell, and a bright moon hung in the sky. A cool breeze blew, and the bright moon hung high in the sky. These two completely different concepts fused together under his sword, and he instantly attacked. It was as if there was not the slightest bit of smoke or fire. Boundless sorrow. Xia Yongshuan's sword carried a sense of sorrow. Any life with some intelligence would be affected by it. This frost demon general obviously had a certain level of intelligence, and it was no exception. However, the frost demon general's intelligence wasn't high, and it wasn't affected that much. It only paused for a moment, but this pause allowed everyone to find an opportunity. Explosive thunder break. Leba opened his hands and drew a line. Countless bolts of lightning gathered and condensed into an incomparably terrifying lightning spear. It seemed as if it could shatter the heavens, and it blasted towards the frost demon general. Void slash. Kong Lu raised one hand, and a silver light flickered on the edge of his palm. Silently, the space under his palm was torn apart, and it quickly spread out towards the frost demon general. Wang Sun's figure flickered, and in a flash he appeared behind the frost demon general, and the short sword in his hand slashed out rapidly. The five of them didn't hold back at all. The frost demon general couldn't dodge, and it immediately suffered the fiercest attack. Even a peak-second refinement expert wouldn't be able to withstand such an attack. The body of the great ice demon general started to shatter. However, there was still a piece of frigid ice chalcedony that didn't completely shatter. A suction force came from the piece of frigid ice chalcedony, and a huge amount of frigid ice chalcedony appeared. Everyone had just unleashed their strongest moves. When they caught sight of this, their faces changed. That recovery speed was way too fast. It was as though the frost demon general would be able to recover more than half of its strength in just a single breath, and it would be able to recover fully in just 2 breaths. Once 1 breath of time passed, the frost demon general would be able to fight again. Moreover, they had just used their strongest moves, and it would be difficult for them to use it a second time. In the blink of an eye, a sword light seemed to have come from the heavens, and it instantly arrived. It seemed as if it had transcended time and space, and it directly struck the piece of the frigid ice chalcedony. It was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. Where the tip of the sword landed, cracks immediately spread out, and with a cracking sound it completely shattered. The part that had just recovered also shattered, and a piece of the frigid ice chalcedony fell to the ground. Everyone couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. With a glance, they saw that it was actually Chumu who had attacked. Good. Leba laughed. What a wonderful sword. With the same cultivation, I don't know if I can block such a sword. Feng Wuhin also laughed. That sword wasn't very strong, and it was only at the first refinement. However, the timing was unique, and it was extremely shocking. We can't just watch from the side. Chumu laughed, and with a swing of his sword, the frigid ice chalcedony fell into Kong Lu's hand. Currently, all the frigid ice chalcedony belonged to Kong Lu. After all, he was the one who had contributed to the secret realm. Of course, this was only temporary. Once they left, it would be time to distribute the frigid ice chalcedony. Everyone, let's recover first. Using their ultimate move had consumed a portion of their energy. Although it was only a small portion, they might encounter even more terrifying frigid ice demon generals later. Hence, it was necessary for them to recover to their peak. What was strange was that they didn't encounter any frigid ice demon generals after that. They continued forward and arrived at the entrance of the ice palace. The ice palace seemed to be made of solid ice. It was a deep blue color and emitted a biting cold that froze everything in its surroundings. That kind of cold actually made everyone feel cold all over. The circulation of their blood and qi was very obviously affected. They had to constantly maintain the circulation of their yuan power to resist the cold that was constantly invading them. The ice palace was very big, and the entrance was tightly shut. There were countless patterns on the entrance, and those patterns formed the image of a frigid ice demon general. While everyone was sizing up the ice palace, the patterns on the door suddenly lit up. Soon after, countless berserk cold chi violently surged from all directions and was absorbed by the door. The light from the patterns became increasingly intense, illuminating everyone's eyes and causing them to feel uncomfortable. When the light dissipated, a frigid ice demon general appeared before everyone's eyes. It was obviously different from the other frigid ice demon generals. This frigid ice demon general was 3 meters tall, and it wore a horned helmet on its head. Its body was covered in deep blue armor, and it was fully armed. It held a 3-meter-long frigid ice halberd in its hand. In the depths of its deep blue eyes, there was a scarlet light flickering. Looking at it made one's heart tremble. This was an extremely terrifying frigid ice demon general. The aura emitted from its body let everyone know that this was a frigid ice demon general that had reached the peak of the second refinement. The peak of the advanced second refinement was already very difficult for them to deal with. Now it had directly surpassed the peak of the second refinement, reached the peak of the second refinement, and even had armor and a weapon. This frigid ice demon general's strength was absolutely terrifying. Defeat me, and you can enter the ice palace. The frigid ice demon general said, its voice incomparably cold. Everyone was shocked. A frigid ice demon general that could speak? One had to know that there were dozens of frigid ice demon generals that had died under their hands. Almost 100 of them. But this was the first time they had encountered a frigid ice demon general that could speak. It seems like it's a test to determine whether or not we can enter the ice palace. A frigid ice demon general that has reached the peak of the second refinement is extremely difficult to deal with. We have to fight with our lives on the line. After the frigid ice demon general finished speaking, its chi fluctuated. Immediately, a ripple spread out from its feet. It was the frigid ice demon ring. In an instant, it spread out to a radius of 1,000 meters, freezing everything. In the instant that the frigid ice demon ring spread out, everyone reacted quickly and retreated at full speed. Feng Wuhen's body was like a gust of wind as he retreated in the blink of an eye. Xia Yongsun retreated a step. Kong Lu's body flickered as he shuttled through the cracks in the air. Lei Ba transformed into a bolt of lightning. Wang Sun seemed to have merged into his shadow. As for Chu Mu, he had retreated even earlier than them. What a terrifying frigid ice chi! Even though everyone had retreated at full speed, they could still feel the terrifying frigid ice chi. A terrifying explosion sounded out. In front of them, an incomparably shocking blue light flashed. It was the frigid ice demon general's halberd. In a flash, it tore through the air and transformed into a terrifying light that shot towards the crowd. There were a total of 6 lights. Each of them contained an incomparably terrifying power. The frigid ice demon general's attack was too fast and too sudden. Everyone was shocked. They immediately used their movement techniques and dodged. The 6 lights tore through the ground. The ice on the ground was forcibly torn apart. The ground was 1,000 meters long. It was as if the ground had been torn apart. It was extremely terrifying. If they were hit by that attack, even if they didn't die, they would be seriously injured. The frigid ice demon general didn't stop. It attacked again. The 3-meter-long halberd in its hand spun and broke through the air again. Spear shadows tore through the air and swept through the world of ice and snow. It was like a violent flood that destroyed everything. The frigid ice demon general's strength was too tyrannical. It had already surpassed Feng Wuhen's strength. He couldn't face it head-on. Everyone could only use their movement techniques and do their best to dodge and find an opportunity to counterattack. Chapter 1935. Countless dark blue spear lights pierced through the air, blasting in all directions and tearing the earth apart. The ice demon general's shocking strength was displayed without a doubt. No one could get close to it. The ice demonic ring with a radius of 1,000 meters in addition to the violent attacks of the spear and halberd, caused cold air to surge from all directions in the world of ice and snow. They turned into ice dragons and entered the ice demonic general's body, replenishing its energy. It could be said that in this mystic realm and in this environment, the frost demon general possessed limitless power. It could unleash all of its attacks to its heart's content. Every attack was at least at the peak of the second refinement, or even at the peak of the second refinement. The power was terrifying and the attack was endless. Among the group, the strongest was Feng Wuhan, who was at the peak of the second refinement, but he could not be compared to the ice demon general. They could only keep dodging, trying to find an opportunity. Unfortunately, the chances were slim. They could not get close to the ice demon general. Shadowless breeze. Feng Wuhan immediately used a secret technique. Shadowless breeze was the only secret technique that Feng Wuhan knew. It could not directly increase his strength, but it could make his body more ethereal. In an instant, it was as if he could turn into a breeze, passing through all the attacks. Feng Wuhan used a secret technique, and Xia Yongshuan also used a secret technique. A sense of sadness seemed to emerge from the depths of his heart. From the roots of his hair, it spread like snow, quickly turning white. His aura was cold and desolate, and his gray eyes revealed a heart-palpitating sadness. In the sky, countless lightning bolts struck down, converging into one, directly hitting Lei Ba's body. Lei Ba suddenly trembled and let out a shocking roar. Countless lightning bolts flashed, and electric arcs jumped. Lightning bolts wandered around his body and finally condensed into an armor of lightning. This was the secret technique that Lei Ba had mastered. He used the power of lightning to condense an armor of lightning to protect himself. Once he was attacked, he could even counterattack. Moreover, it made his power of lightning stronger, increasing his strength by 7 to 8 times. Void transformation, shatter. Silver light flashed in Kong Lu's eyes. The power of space around him was chaotic and violent. With a wave of his hands, he crossed more than 1,000 meters. The space behind the Frost Demon General instantly cracked open and spread rapidly, affecting the Frost Demon General's body. Kong Lu's secret technique was different from other people's. It didn't increase one's strength, nor did it increase one's speed. Instead, it was a direct offensive secret technique. It only had a momentary power, but once it was unleashed, it was extremely terrifying. Among the secret techniques, offensive secret techniques were extremely rare. They were even more precious than secret techniques that could increase one's strength. The space shattered, covering the entire body of the Frost Demon General. The horrifying power continued to cut the body of the Frost Demon General, leaving scars on its body. Void Flow used his full strength for this secret technique. He did not hold back at all. With his strength as an intermediate second refinement, it was enough to kill an advanced second refinement and threaten a peak second refinement. However, the Frost Demon General's strength was at the peak of the second refinement. When his power erupted and he waved his halberd, he actually managed to forcibly shatter the void. Kong Lu's expression changed, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. At the same time, Wind Without Trace, who had used Shadowless Breeze, ignored the Frost Demon General's Frost Demon Ring and Frost Halberd. He appeared in front of the Frost Demon General. The spiritual sword in his hand turned into an infinite number of densely packed swords that condensed into a gust of wind that blew forward. That gust of wind was formed by the combination of countless sword chi and sword radiance. When it blew on the Frost Demon General's body, it immediately tore apart its armor. This sword was Wind Without Trace's most powerful attack. Even someone at the peak of the second refinement would be threatened by it. However, the Frost Demon General was too powerful. It was even more shocking than an ordinary peak of the second refinement. This was because once it was injured, as long as it wasn't a fatal injury, it could instantly absorb the cold air to recover. Therefore, the damage caused by Wind Without Trace full strength attack was instantly healed. As the frost halberd waved, a horrifying power swept out in all directions. Countless cold air surged and nearly froze Wind Without Trace. The Shadowless Breeze secret technique was indeed a shocking secret technique that could allow one to avoid many attacks. However, this kind of cold air attack happened to be its nemesis. Xia Yongshuan attacked with all his might, and the heavens and earth grieved. However, he still couldn't kill the Frost Demon General. He couldn't even injure it. The difference in strength was too great. Wang Sun was only at the beginning of the second refinement. Using the secret technique only allowed him to hide even more. It was clearly very powerless against an existence like the Frost Demon General. Lei Ba turned into lightning and tore through the sky, shattering the ice. It was like a sudden clap of thunder that fell from the sky. It struck the Frost Demon General, but it was blocked by the frost halberd in the Frost Demon General's hand. With a bang, Lei Ba was sent flying. The thunder armor on his body instantly shattered. The power of that attack had exceeded the thunder armor's endurance. It was also because the thunder armor had blocked the Frost Demon General's attack that Lei Ba wasn't killed. As his body flew out, the Frost Demon General followed up with another attack. A terrifying icy blue spear radiance charged towards Lei Ba as if it could shatter the vacuum. Dodge. Be careful. Feng Wuhen, Kong Lu, and the others' faces changed drastically. Lei Ba was one of them. He was an ally of the Ancient Sword Alliance and could be considered as their friend. He was someone who wanted to fight against the imperial court. No matter what his identity was, he couldn't die here. However, the Frost Demon General's strength was too tyrannical. They couldn't help and save Lei Ba at all. Wang Sun's figure flashed as he quickly approached Lei Ba. He hadn't made a move until now. Now, it was time for him to use it. However, the Ice Devil General seemed to have sensed Wang Sun's actions. Its eyes flickered with a sharp light as it shot out two terrifying icy blue rays. Everywhere it passed, the void froze. Wang Sun, who was locked onto, also felt his body tremble. The coldness invaded his entire body, causing his blood to freeze. His movements paused in an instant, as though his entire person was about to be frozen solid. What was worse was that Wang Sun had just appeared beside Lei Ba. Not only did he fail to save Lei Ba, he even trapped himself. Under the Frost Demon General's attack, the two of them would instantly be smashed into pieces. It's over. Lei Ba was extremely unwilling, but there was nothing he could do. Not only did that attack shatter his thunder armor, the terrifying power also caused him to temporarily lose all resistance. The power in his body didn't listen to his orders and couldn't be mobilized. Don't worry. An indifferent voice entered the ears of Lei Ba and Wang Sun, who were in despair. That voice sounded extremely familiar. Moreover, it was one of the voices that they had been hearing recently. However, they didn't dare to believe it. A burning blood-red sword light broke through the void and descended, as if it had crossed thousands of miles. The blood-red sword gleam slashed at the icy blue spear gleam. When they collided, an incomparably terrifying power erupted. In an instant, it exploded and spread out in all directions. The terrifying aftershock could easily kill a second refinement powerhouse. Lei Ba and Wang Sun only felt a force pushing their bodies. In an instant, they were pushed to the left and right. Coincidentally, they avoided all the impact and landed far away. It's Chumu. It's actually him. Since when did this guy have such strength? Feng Wuhen, Xia Yongshuan, and Kong Lu were extremely shocked. Their eyes widened. Ever since they were young, nothing had surprised them as much as this. In their opinion, Chumu's strength was at most at the peak of the first refinement. That was already an extremely high level. However, it seemed like that wasn't the case. The peak of the first refinement had been underestimated. They had greatly underestimated Chumu. Lei Ba and Wang Sun, who had landed on the ground, were also dumbfounded. They stared foolishly at the figure that was fighting with the Frost Demon General. His body was burning with blood-red flames. With a terrifying power fluctuation, he held a sword in each hand and continuously attacked. His attacks were incomparably violent. He actually managed to suppress the ferocious Frost Demon General. The 5 of them had all turned into wooden sculptures. Their minds were in a mess, and they were completely unable to react. They originally thought that he was the weakest among the 6 of them. However, he had suddenly become the strongest. This change was too sudden, and it was difficult for them to accept it. While they were fighting with the Frost Demon General, Chumu had already seen the situation clearly. He quickly retreated and used the Divine Wilderness Unity mystic technique. As he had retreated far away, and everyone's attention was focused on the Frost Demon General, no one paid attention to what Chumu was doing. After using the Divine Wilderness Unity mystic technique, power filled his entire body. Chumu then used the Blood Prison Heaven Burning mystic technique, burning 30% of his blood essence in exchange for an 8-fold increase in strength. With 2 swords in hand, his strength multiplied. Under the sword domain transformation, it increased by 7 times. His strength soared, reaching the peak of the advanced 2nd refinement. He was 1 step away from the peak of the 2nd refinement. However, such strength was still not enough to fight against the Frost Demon General. Therefore, Chumu used the Sword God's Descent mystic technique. The 2nd level of the Sword God's Descent mystic technique was a 100-fold increase. Chumu's strength had exceeded the limit of the 2nd refinement. It was equivalent to having half a step into the 3rd refinement. In terms of absolute strength, Chumu had already surpassed the Frost Demon General. However, the Frost Demon General still had the geographical advantage. Powerful strength and exquisite swordsmanship gave Chumu astonishing strength. No matter how powerful the Frost Demon General was, it was still suppressed. Chumu's dual sword attacks were endless. Each strike penetrated the Frost Demon General's ice spear and halberd, slashing at its body and tearing apart its armor. The Frost Demon General's combat techniques were unrestrained. Compared to Chumu's, it could only be described as crude. After a long while, everyone gradually reacted. Their eyes were filled with resentment as they stared at Chumu's figure like a resentful wife in her boudoir. This fellow is actually so powerful. Why didn't he say anything? Wang Sun said. He felt ashamed when he thought of how he had tried to probe Chumu. He's too good at hiding, Feng Wuhan muttered. The others also had their own thoughts. Chapter 1936. Feng Wuhan, Xia Yongshuan, Kong Lu, Lei Ba, and Wang Sun were all reduced to spectators. Chumu unleashed all of his strength and displayed his sword techniques to his heart's content. His exquisite and peerless sword techniques caused Feng Wuhan and Xia Yongshuan to be incomparably shocked. The 2 of them were sword cultivators, so their experience was much deeper than the other 3. I've underestimated him. Feng Wuhan smiled bitterly and shook his head. In front of Chumu, all his advantages were gone. In terms of strength, he was only at the peak of the 2nd refinement, while Chumu was at least at the peak of the 2nd refinement. In terms of swordsmanship, Chumu was even better than him. His swordsmanship has improved greatly compared to the past. Kong Lu and Lei Ba were also very emotional. In the past, they had fought with Chumu. It was almost pure battle techniques, so they knew how Chumu's swordsmanship was decades ago. Unexpectedly, in just 33 years, not only had his strength improved at an unprecedented speed, but his swordsmanship had also improved greatly. He was simply an inhuman existence. At this time, the outside world was searching for Chumu's whereabouts. The 4 imperial guards of the imperial court had also chased to the Tian Shan domain. They seemed to have a special ability to track Chumu's whereabouts. This ice demon general was different from the other ice demon generals. It had intelligence that was almost comparable to a human's. Moreover, it had an absolute calmness that humans did not have. In the face of Chu Mu's continuous attacks, the ice demon general continued to resist without the slightest anger. It was very clear where its advantage was. In this place, its power was endless. As long as it did not die, it would quickly recover. Therefore, as long as it had enough time, when this human's power was mostly exhausted and he could no longer maintain this kind of attack, it would be the time for it to counterattack. The ice demon general did not have any distinction between ordinary moves or ultimate moves. Every move it made was an ordinary move, but every move it made was an ultimate move. It fully displayed its power. Therefore, in such an environment, even if the opponent was stronger than it, as long as it was not an absolute suppression, it would be the final winner. With Chu Mu's intelligence, how could he not understand this? Chu Mu understood. In the secret realm, the advantage of this frost demon general is too obvious. If we can't kill it, it will recover very quickly. With my current strength, I can be considered half a step to the third refinement. If I use the great heavenly might sword style, its power might barely reach the third refinement level. It should be enough to kill this frost demon general. However, using the great heavenly might sword style requires some time. If I give the frost demon general some time, it will be disadvantageous to me. Chu Mu understood this very well. Thus, his current attack was not useless. Instead, he was preparing to unleash a killing blow. One sword strike after another in a continuous stream. The cloud-piercing sword style, the Dao-cutting sword style, and the Zhentian sword style alternated. With absolute power, Chu Mu did not need to defend or dodge at all. He only needed to attack, and suppress the frost demon general. The heart sword was like a single strike. Every strike would definitely hit the frost devil general's body. Heaven and earth cross slash. The resplendent heaven and earth cross sword light directly imprinted on the frost demon general's chest. The frost armor on its body endured Chu Mu's repeated attacks, and cracks continuously appeared. Although it absorbed the cold air to recover, the speed of recovery could not keep up with the speed of Chu Mu's destruction. Under the heaven and earth cross slash, the frost armor was directly shattered. This is the chance. Chu Mu's eyes shone brightly, as if a divine sword had been unsheathed. Dao cutting sword style. The two swords slashed the frost demon general's arms, which were holding the frost spear and halberd. Then, the two swords violently slashed the other arm. Your time has come. Great heavenly might sword style, shattering the ice armor and chopping off his arms. Even if he had the advantage of the environment and could quickly recover, he still needed a bit of time. Yet, this bit of time was exactly what Chu Mu needed. The sword was raised high. The sky of the secret realm was unable to stop the descent of the heavenly lightning. Countless lightning flashes condensed into an incomparably terrifying thunderbolt that instantly struck down. The thunderbolt struck Chu Mu's raised sword. Chu Mu's body seemed to tremble, and an indescribable power spread out. Lei Ba's eyes widened. He was a lightning cultivator, and the power of lightning in his body was even more tyrannical than experts of the same level who had comprehended the law of lightning. But at this moment, when he felt the thunderbolt from the sky, he was incomparably shocked. The power of lightning was completely above his. Chu Mu was a sword cultivator, not a lightning cultivator. How could he endure this? How could he endure this? The sword with all his strength, the most tyrannical sword, was slashed down. At the same time, the frost demon general's arms recovered, and the frost spear and halberd were once again in his hands. The frost armor on his body was also half-formed. Slash! A loud roar resounded, and the sword slashed down. The indescribable sword light tore the sky apart. The sword light traversed the past and the present, rampaging through the heavens and the earth. Feng Wuhan and the others were all dumbfounded. They couldn't find any words to describe Chu Mu's sword. The terrifying aura let them know that this was a sword that had surpassed the second refinement. This sword already had the power of the third refinement. Just when they thought that they had seen through Chu Mu once again displayed a strength that shocked them. A sword that had the power of the third refinement. It was an unimaginable sword. This sword directly shattered the heavens and the earth. The Frost Demon General was simply unable to resist. Under the incomparably terrifying sword light, its body began to crumble inch by inch. Even when countless amounts of frost chi rushed over, it was unable to save the Frost Demon General. With a bang, the tyrannical Frost Demon General, in front of everyone's eyes, exploded under Chu Mu's sword. The sword light disappeared, and Chu Mu quickly flicked the Frost Chalcedony into his hand. Everyone stared blankly at Chu Mu. For a moment, their minds were frozen. After a long time, they finally reacted. "You tricked us." Feng Wuhan smiled bitterly. "How is this the limit of the first refinement? It clearly has the power of the third refinement. You didn't ask." Chu Mu shrugged his shoulders and said innocently. Such an expression made everyone want to surround him and beat him up. At that moment, an obscure but loud sound rang out. The tightly shut doors of the Ice Palace opened. "The Ice Palace is open. Let's go in." Everyone was instantly overjoyed. They quickly moved and appeared in front of the Ice Palace's doors and entered. The palace was 300 meters tall and a few thousand meters wide. It looked extremely huge. Around the palace, there were countless murals. There were Frost Demons, Frost Demon General, and even something more terrifying than the Frost Demon General. Those murals were lifelike, as if they could come to life at any time. Of course, no one hoped that the Frost Demons, Frost Demon General, or something even more terrifying would come to life. They quickly scanned the palace, and in the end, their gazes focused on the throne at the center of the palace. That throne was made of ice, but it didn't emit any coldness. However, there was nothing on the ice throne at all. "Is there no treasure? Everyone, let's look." The 6 of them quickly spread out and searched everywhere. Unfortunately, they didn't find anything. They also didn't find the so-called secret door. Some strong cultivators only leave behind their own inheritances. If that's the case, then the inheritance should be on the throne. Xia Yongshuan said. Looking at this secret territory and the throne, the person who left behind the inheritance should be an ice elemental cultivator. "It's useless to me." Feng Wuhan shook his head. He was a wind elemental cultivator, and he would continue walking down this path. "It's useless to me as well." Xia Yongshuan, Lei Ba, and Wang Sun shook their heads. There was nothing they could do. None of them were ice elemental cultivators. "I'm also not an ice elemental cultivator," Chu Mu said. If others heard this, they would probably cry until they fainted in the toilet. Here, they didn't seem to be willing to accept an opportunity that others couldn't obtain. After all, they were very clear about their own path. They couldn't change their cultivation path, nor could they divert their attention to other paths. The Frost Demon General was killed by Chu Mu. The door to the palace can be considered open by him. Chu Mu, go and accept the inheritance. Feng Wuhan smiled. Even if you don't cultivate ice elemental cultivation, you might still be able to obtain the treasures left behind by the strong cultivator. There might be treasures that can increase our strength. Everyone expressed their agreement, and Chu Mu could only accept it. He strode towards the throne. Suddenly, a light flashed on the throne, and an illusory figure condensed, sitting on the throne. That illusory figure looked very blurry, but his eyes were ice blue. Wherever his gaze landed, everyone's body froze, as if they were frozen. An unconcealable chill rose in their hearts. I'm a consciousness left behind by the Frost Saint Sovereign. I left my inheritance here. You guys are fated to be able to enter this place. The illusory figure with ice-blue eyes suddenly spoke. His voice carried a shocking chill, as if it had pierced through time and space. There was a special rhythm to his voice. Frost Saint Sovereign. A Saint Sovereign expert. Everyone exclaimed. Frost Saint Sovereign, this secret realm is actually left behind by a Saint Sovereign. Chu Mu was also shocked. Saint Sovereign? No, a Saint Sovereign is not a Saint Sovereign. Feng Wuhan glanced at Chu Mu and said, That's right. Everyone thinks that Saint Sovereigns are Saint Sovereigns, but that's not the case. This era is no longer the era of Saint Sovereigns. Xia Yongshu sighed, feeling lonely. In the past, we didn't know, but now we know. The deep blue world is gradually declining, and it can no longer support the power of a Saint Sovereign. Therefore, this era is the era where Saint Sovereigns don't appear. Kong Lu explained. Saint Sovereign is actually a title for a fifth refinement exceptional expert. Chu Mu suddenly understood. It seemed like the 5 Saint Sovereigns of the Blue Sea human race weren't the 5 Saint Sovereigns, but 5 fifth refinement exceptional experts. Chapter 1937. Chu Mu had always thought of Saint Sovereigns and Saint Emperors as equals. Only now did he know that Saint Sovereigns were Saint Sovereigns and Saint Emperors were Saint Emperors. They were 2 completely different concepts. Saint Sovereigns were called fifth refinement exceptional experts. Exceptional experts used their yuan qi to refine the laws. However, Saint Emperors had already surpassed that level and were exploring the great Tao. The deep blue world was declining day by day. That was because the great Tao was declining. It could no longer support the Saint Emperors. Even the Saint Emperors' every action would have an obvious impact. Therefore, the Saint Emperors had no choice but to enter seclusion to break through to a higher level and leave the deep blue world. Therefore, this era was called the era where Saint Emperors did not appear. This was a secret that was passed down among the exceptional experts. The majority of first refinement exceptional experts did not know about it. Only those exceptional experts who had lived long enough would know about it. Although the 6 of you can enter the Ice Palace, you do not walk the Tao of Ice. Therefore, you cannot obtain my inheritance. Holy Master Ice's virtual image continued. However, since you can enter the Ice Palace, even if you are destined to be with me, I can't let you go back empty-handed. However, what kind of opportunity you can get depends on your own abilities. After saying that, the eyes of Saint Sovereign Ice's consciousness image lit up. 2 rays of icy blue light shot out. Immediately, an icy blue vortex appeared before everyone. Go in. What kind of fortune you can obtain will depend on your luck. Saint Sovereign Ice's consciousness image disappeared after saying that. Do you want to go in? Lei Ba looked at the blue vortex, then looked at the others and asked, Let's go in. Feng Wuhan said. He immediately stepped forward and entered the blue vortex. They couldn't get the inheritance of Saint Venerable Ice because Saint Venerable Ice's consciousness had said very clearly that the inheritance was for cultivators of the Tao of Ice, and they weren't. However, even if it was given to them, whether they would accept it or not was another matter. Now that there were other fortunes, they obviously had to obtain them. What was the purpose of entering the secret realm? Of course, it was to obtain fortunes and increase one's strength. Now that the fortune was right in front of them, what was the point of not obtaining it? After Wind Without Trace stepped into the blue vortex, the others followed suit. The moment Chu Mu stepped in, he felt as though he was shuttling through time and space. Countless streams of blue light swirled before his eyes. After that, the scenery changed again. Chu Mu appeared in a strange mountain valley. Other than him, the other 5 people were not here. Maybe they had their own opportunities and appeared in other places. He quickly scanned the surroundings of the valley. The valley didn't look very big, and he could see the end of it with a single glance. It was strange because the valley seemed to be divided into 2 halves by an invisible force. One half was lush with grass and trees, full of vitality, while the other half was dry and cracked, full of sand and rocks, full of death. Life and death split. Chu Mu frowned slightly. His divine sense spread out and encapsulated the entire valley. Half was filled with life, while the other half was filled with deathly stillness. The contrast was very obvious. Other than using his soul power to sense, Chu Mu also walked back and forth. He walked into the place filled with life and felt the powerful life force, then walked into the place filled with deathly stillness. He walked back and forth a few times, scanning with his divine sense, but he did not find any treasures. Chu Mu frowned, but he was not willing to give up. Just like Saint Sovereign Ice's consciousness image had said, the fortune one could obtain depended on one's own ability. Luck also played a part in one's ability. This valley was so strange. Half of it was alive, half of it was dead. There must be some treasure in it. It was just that Chu Mu had not found it yet. "Calm down, there's no need to rush," Chu Mu said to himself. He took a deep breath to calm himself down. The sound of his heartbeat became very clear. His thoughts gradually spread out along with the power of his soul. His breathing also became more and more subtle. Finally, it disappeared. Time passed slowly. Chu Mu gradually felt as if he had become one with the surrounding air. As the air spread out, he gradually became one with the valley. Everything in the valley was under his control in great detail. It felt like his thoughts were gradually penetrating deeper into the valley. Half an hour later, everything in the valley was under Chu Mu's control. In the half of the life force, there was a dense life force. In the other half of the deathly stillness, there was a shocking deathly stillness. Moreover, these two forces carried a kind of sharpness, a sharpness that belonged to a sword. "Come out!" With a loud shout, sound waves spread out, overlapping each other, directly attacking the life force and silence hidden in the depths of the valley. Under the influence of Chu Mu's power, the two forces hidden in the valley suddenly appeared and floated in the air. The two forces were in the shape of swords, about the size of a finger. One was green, full of vitality, while the other was gray, full of deathly stillness. Chu Mu's gaze immediately fell on the two small sword shadows. "Come!" With a low roar, Chu Mu extended his hand and grabbed at the air. Under his powerful strength, he immediately grabbed the sword image, brimming with vitality. However, the sword image struggled and instantly broke free from Chu Mu's hand. With a flash of light, it slashed out a sword aura. Cyan-colored sword chi, carrying an incomparably dense life force, shot towards Chu Mu. That sword chi instantly transformed into a cyan lotus. Its petals bloomed wave after wave, and every time it bloomed, a wave of sword chi would shoot out in all directions. A portion of it would shoot towards Chu Mu, filling the entire valley. Chu Mu attacked, continuously shattering the sword aura. However, the green lotuses continued to blossom, as if there was no limit. Wave after wave of sword aura continuously shot out in a continuous and endless manner. At the same time, the sword shadow that was filled with deathly stillness also pierced through the void, shooting out a grayish-white sword chi. There was only one sword chi, but it carried a shocking, deathly intent. It was capable of destroying everything in the world. Even the void could not resist it. Chu Mu's body tensed up and his hair stood on end. Endless vitality, deathly stillness, what a terrifying power. Chu Mu was not afraid. Instead, he was excited, because the stronger it was, the more useful it would be after he subdued it. Blood prison, burning heaven. Sword domain change. Using the two secret skills, his strength immediately increased. He slashed out with both swords, and his terrifying power shattered the gray-white, deathly still sword chi. He then shattered the green sword chi, and the two swords crossed, unleashing the heaven and earth cross slash. The resplendent cross-shaped sword light tore apart the green lotus, causing it to shatter. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Chu Mu attacked with all his strength. 2 rays of sword aura shot out and separately attacked the 2 sword images. His figure flashed, and he used sword aura shadow. He immediately appeared beside the cyan-colored sword image and grabbed it with one hand. A powerful force gathered in his palm and grabbed the sword shadow. The green sword shadow instantly exploded with a tyrannical power, trying to shake off Chumu's palm. However, Chumu was already prepared. He used all his strength and used a power dissipation technique to dissipate the power of the sword shadow and capture it. His body flashed again, and he appeared beside the gray sword shadow. Using the same method, he grabbed the gray sword shadow with his left hand. Chumu grabbed the 2 sword shadows. All resistance was dissipated by him. They could not escape. Suppress. Without any hesitation, Chumu exploded with power again and used the second level of Sword God's descent to suppress the 2 sword shadows. The power turned into streaks and wrapped around the 2 sword shadows. They lost all resistance and could not move at all. Congratulations, Destined One. You have obtained the life and death sword spirits. Holy Sovereign Ice's voice suddenly sounded in the sky above the valley. However, there was only Chumu in the valley. Life and death sword spirits. Chumu repeated, "The life and death sword spirits are a unique treasure that I have obtained. They are a set of unique treasures. Among the various treasures that I have collected, they are in the top 3. Holy Sovereign Ice's voice sounded again. The life and death sword spirits can be refined into a spiritual sword to increase the power of the spiritual sword. You can also comprehend powerful sword moves from the life and death sword spirits. The 2 spiritual swords that have been refined into the life and death sword spirits can cooperate with each other and become even more mysterious. However, you must remember that the life and death sword spirits can only be refined once." Chumu listened attentively. He heard every word that Holy Sovereign Ice said clearly and could understand it. According to what Holy Sovereign Ice said, the life and death sword spirits were prepared for me. Chumu thought, the life and death sword spirits were 2 sword spirits. If he wanted to refine them, he had to refine them into 2 spiritual swords. Furthermore, after refining the life and death sword spirits, not only would the spiritual swords become more powerful, but the combination of the 2 spiritual swords would also become more mysterious. Among sword cultivators, most of them used a single sword. Very few of them used 2 swords. Among the sword cultivators that Chumu had met who used 2 swords, none of them had mastered the true dual sword skill. When the life and death sword spirits were refined into a spiritual sword, the dual sword skill would be more mysterious and powerful. However, the life and death sword spirits could only be refined once. In other words, if Chumu refined them now, he would not be able to separate them and refine them into other spiritual swords in the future. I have the eternal spiritual sword and the silver light spiritual sword. The eternal spiritual sword can be refined into a sword spirit. It seems a bit wasteful to refine the silver light spiritual sword's sword spirit. Chumu thought, the silver light spiritual sword was just a temporary spiritual sword. When the annihilation sword essence was completely formed, he could cast the primordial spiritual sword embryo that had been nurtured in his dantian for many years into the annihilation spiritual sword. That was the spiritual sword that Chumu really wanted. In that case, I will wait until the annihilation spiritual sword is cast and then refine the sword spirit completely. Chapter 1938. Ha 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 ha. I never thought that I would be able to obtain such a good item. Under the lightning region, tens of thousands of lightning bolts struck, as if it was about to destroy the earth, turning it into a sea of lightning. Lei-Ba rushed out from the countless lightning bolts. He was in a sorry state, his body was charred black, and he seemed to be seriously injured. However, he was extremely excited because he was holding a heart-like object tightly in his hands. That heart-like object was purple in color, with countless electric arcs surrounding it. Inside, it was like a sea of lightning, like a miniature version of the lightning region. This was the thunderbolt core that had been nurtured by the lightning region for countless years. It was also one of the treasures that the Ice Sovereign had collected. The Ice Sovereign was extremely powerful, and he was one of the best among the fifth refinement exceptional experts. He had experienced a lot in his life, and the treasures that he had collected were innumerable. Some of them were even super treasures. Lei Ba was a lightning cultivator. After obtaining the Thunderbolt core and refining it, not only would his cultivation increase faster in the future, but his combat strength would also become stronger. The place that Feng Wuhen had entered was a place of storms. Countless storms were raging, as if they could destroy the world. Naturally, he had also obtained the treasure that was nurtured within, the stormy demonic spirit. Feng Wuhen mainly cultivated the Wind Dao. As long as he could refine the stormy demonic spirit, his comprehension of the Wind Dao would deepen, and his strength would also increase. The opportunities that the Ice Sovereign had arranged were very suitable for everyone. Of course, although they were suitable, it would depend on one's own ability to obtain them. For example, Chu Mu, if he did not discover the two sword spirits of life and death, and if he could not subdue them, it would be useless even if he knew about it. Lei Ba, if he could not obtain the Thunderbolt core from the lightning region, it would be useless as well. Feng Wuhen had obtained the stormy demonic spirit, and Wang Sun had obtained the dark cloak, a treasure. After refining and wearing it, it would allow him to escape into the darkness of the void, making him even more secretive. Kong Lu had obtained the void armor, a treasure armor that contained the power of the void. Not only did it have amazing defensive capabilities, but it could also increase the power of space that Kong Lu had grasped. Xia Yongxuan was a sword cultivator, but the Dao that he cultivated was different from others. It was a rare Dao. Great sorrow. The path of great compassion was a path of 7 emotions and 6 desires. It was very difficult to cultivate and comprehend. Since ancient times, very few cultivators had taken this path. Ice Saint Master was indeed a powerful Saint Master. Among his treasures, there were treasures related to the 7 emotions and 6 desires. Moreover, they were coincidentally related to the way of sorrow. Great compassion hoop. The 6 of them entered the blue vortex door and appeared in different places, obtaining their own fortuitous encounters. In the life and death valley, Chu Mu was refining the sword spirit of life. His plan was to refine the sword spirit of life into the eternal spiritual sword and the sword spirit of death into the annihilation spiritual sword. However, the annihilation sword intent had not completely taken shape, so he could not nurture the annihilation spiritual sword. He temporarily put away the sword spirit of death and only refined the sword spirit of life. It was not difficult to refine the sword spirit of life. After a few hours, Chu Mu successfully refined the sword spirit of life into the eternal spiritual sword. Immediately, the eternal spiritual sword hummed as if it was very happy. The successful refinement of the sword spirit of life greatly increased the spirituality of the eternal spiritual sword. It rose from the level of a lower grade spiritual sword to a middle grade spiritual sword. The eternal spiritual sword was personally nurtured by Chu Mu and was 100% compatible with Chu Mu. Because of the eternal power, the lower grade eternal spiritual sword was comparable to an ordinary middle grade spiritual sword. It was also because of this that it was more difficult to upgrade it. After a few decades, it had only reached the peak of the lower grade spiritual sword. However, if it wanted to upgrade it, it would need at least another few decades. Now, after refining the sword spirit of life, its spirituality had increased greatly. It had surpassed the shackles between the lower grade spiritual sword and the middle grade spiritual sword and upgraded to a middle grade spiritual sword. Moreover, it had not just reached the level of a middle grade spiritual sword. The upgrade of a spiritual sword's grade would obviously increase the power of the sword. In other words, the current eternal spiritual sword's power had increased. Moreover, because of the refinement of the sword spirit of life, the increase was even greater. Originally, the middle-grade eternal spiritual sword was comparable to an ordinary upper-grade spiritual sword. Because of the sword's spirit of life, its power was close to an ordinary supreme-grade spiritual sword. With Chu Mu's current strength, it was impossible for him to support the consumption of a supreme-grade spiritual sword. However, the eternal spiritual sword was a middle-grade spiritual sword. Moreover, it was a middle-grade spiritual sword that he had nurtured, so he could use it freely. Think about it, a middle-grade spiritual sword that had the power of a supreme-grade spiritual sword. How terrifying was that? After refining, Chu Mu held the eternal spiritual sword. Without using the silver light spiritual sword, his strength had increased from the peak of the initial second refining to the middle second refining. If he used the silver light spiritual sword, his strength would be even more powerful. When the annihilation sword essence is formed and the annihilation spiritual sword is nurtured, then I will refine the sword spirit of life and death. Under the circumstances of using two swords, my strength will definitely increase by several times. Chu Mu thought to himself. He was extremely excited and had a strong sense of anticipation. He could not wait to master the annihilation spiritual sword. However, there was still some time before the annihilation sword essence was fully formed. He could only wait patiently. I wonder what the other few have obtained. Chu Mu thought to himself. With a thought, he left the valley that had returned to normal. Without the life and death sword spirits, the strange phenomenon in the valley naturally disappeared. Figures appeared in the main hall one after another. Everyone had a smile on their faces. Obviously, they had gained a lot. Everyone, let's talk about what we have gained this time. Feng Wuhan smiled and said, let's start with me. I have obtained the stormy demonic spirit. After refining it, it can increase my comprehension of the way of the wind and increase the power of the way of the wind. Since Feng Wuhan had said so, the others did not hide anything. They all spoke of their gains. Great. This time, all of us have gained quite a lot. As long as we refine the supreme treasures that we have obtained, our strength will increase significantly. Moreover, we have the frigid jade essence. If we refine it, we will definitely be able to go deeper in the refinement of the laws. It will improve our cultivation and strength. Kong Lu was overjoyed. The improvement of one person's strength was only a matter of one person. However, if everyone could become stronger, it would directly affect the strength of their alliance. Whether or not they could go up against the imperial dynasty was their goal. Now they had achieved half of it. This secret realm is not bad. The Ice Palace also has enough defensive power. Why don't we refine the treasures that we have obtained here first? After that, we can refine the frigid jade essence to increase our cultivation. This suggestion was approved by everyone. Chu Mu had already refined the life sword spirit of the life and death sword spirits. He would not refine the death sword spirit for the time being. However, it was not that he had nothing to do. He summoned the eternal spiritual sword and immersed his consciousness into it to sense it carefully. According to the Ice Saint Sovereign, the life and death sword spirits were among the top 3 treasures that he had collected. They were extremely precious because of their shocking value. It could be refined into a spiritual sword, increasing the spiritual quality of the spiritual sword and increasing the power of the spiritual sword. When the 2 swords worked together, the life and death sword spirits could resonate and become even more mysterious, increasing the power of the spiritual sword. Moreover, whether it was the life sword spirit or the death sword spirit, they both contained shocking power. One could comprehend them and comprehend powerful sword moves from them. If the Ice Saint Sovereign thought that sword moves were powerful, they would definitely be extraordinary. After all, the Ice Saint Sovereign was a peerless expert at the peak of the 5th refinement. Compared to the Heavenly Sword Saint Sovereign, he would only be stronger. Hence, Chu Mu was looking forward to the sword moves. Another figure flew across the sky. He was extremely fast and gave off a shocking aura. That's the 18th one. Our Sky Mountain region is just a small and remote region. What happened? Why are there 18 peerless experts from the outer region? Terrifying. This is too terrifying. The aura of the peerless experts. The Sky Mountain region only had one peerless expert a few 100,000 years ago. After that, there were no more peerless experts. It could be said that the Sky Mountain region was a place that lacked cultivation resources. The peerless experts from the outer regions would not come here. But now, not only had they come, but there were 18 of them. Could it be that some treasure has appeared in our Sky Mountain region? It's possible. Only some great treasure would attract so many peerless experts. One after another, the peerless experts came from all directions and gathered in the Sky Mountain region. Moreover, all of them were heading towards the Sky Mountain region where the Sky Mountain Palace was located. The people of the Sky Mountain Palace were all expelled. The Sky Mountain Palace was occupied by the peerless experts. However, the disciples of the Sky Mountain Palace could not object. Even though the Sky Mountain Palace was the strongest force in the Sky Mountain region, the strongest cultivator was only a saint. They could not compete with any of the peerless experts. In order to not be completely annihilated, the Celestial Mountain Palace's palace master could only swallow his anger. He led his disciples and rapidly left the Celestial Mountain Palace to other places. Even so, they were still paying attention to the situation. Once they had the opportunity, they would definitely take back the Celestial Mountain Palace. However, the people of the Sky Mountain Palace, including the people of the Sky Mountain region, did not know that these peerless experts had entered the Sky Mountain region for Chu Mu and the others. They also did not know that in the Sky Mountain region of the Sky Mountain Palace, there was a door that led to the Ice Secret Territory. That Ice Secret Territory had been left behind by the peerless expert of the fifth refinement, the Ice Holy Master. Chu Mu and the others were in the Ice Palace of the Ice Secret Territory, refining treasures and increasing their strength. Time passed little by little. More and more peerless experts entered the Sky Mountain region. They brought great destruction to the Sky Mountain region. The time for Chu Mu and the others to come out was getting closer and closer. Chapter 1939. The shocking aura was like a black cloud, hovering above the Sky Mountain, emitting terrifying fluctuations. This aura was extremely chaotic, coming from different experts. They collided with each other like waves crashing into each other, creating even more terrifying ripples. The cultivators of the Sky Mountain domain couldn't get close because once they entered the range, they would be affected by the aura. Their minds would be shaken, and the more serious ones would have their minds broken. However, there were some outstanding cultivators who were able to get close to a certain range and use the terrifying aura to temper their wills. In the Sky Mountain domain, supreme experts were extremely rare. Some cultivators couldn't even see a single one in their entire life. How could it be like now? Hundreds of supreme experts had all entered the Sky Mountain domain and occupied the entire region with the Sky Mountain domain as the center. The 4 imperial guards of the imperial clan directly occupied the main palace of the Sky Mountain domain. The other side palaces were occupied by other supreme experts. Their purpose in coming here was Chu Mu, so there was no conflict between them. Although Chu Mu had the divine sealing compass that could hide the heavenly secrets in this world, it wasn't only the path of divination that could find a person's whereabouts. The path of divination was merely a method. No matter if it was the Imperial clan or the Sky clan, they all had their own perfect intelligence network. In a situation where divination was ineffective, other methods were naturally activated. There were specialized people who investigated and analyzed all kinds of clues. In the end, they confirmed that Chu Mu had entered the Sky Mountain domain. It had to be said that these perfect intelligence networks were amazing. They couldn't find any clues, and after analyzing the clues, they finally found the target's whereabouts. During this period of time, they had to spend a lot of time and effort It was even more difficult than divination. However, this was also to prevent treasures from obscuring heaven's secrets. The imperial guards of the imperial clan, the divine forbidden guards of the sky clan, and the supreme experts of the human race were mostly gathered in the Sky Mountain domain. With the Sky Mountain domain as the center, they were all waiting for Chu Mu's appearance. In the Ice Palace, everyone had finished their cultivation. Not only had they refined the treasures they had obtained, they had also refined the frigid ice chalcedony. The frigid ice chalcedony contained an incomparably pure energy that could be absorbed and refined. Refining it would not increase one's cultivation base, but it could assist one in refining the power of law. In other words, it could speed up the refinement of the power of law. Although the frigid ice chalcedony was very good, it was of no use to Chu Mu at all. His cultivation was at the limit of the saint level, and he was not a peerless expert. He did not control the power of laws, but the true meaning. Of course, if he had already refined his true intent and truly stepped into the realm of a peerless expert, this frigid ice chalcedony would still be extremely useful to him. Unfortunately, Chu Mu did not have a suitable cultivation technique. However, the frigid ice chalcedony was evenly distributed. Although Chu Mu could not use it now, it did not mean that he could not use it in the future. Thus, he temporarily put it away. After the others refined the frigid ice chalcedony and refined the treasures they had obtained, their cultivation base had all increased, and their strength had also increased. The weakest among them, Wang's son, had advanced from the early stage of the second refinement to the middle stage of the second refinement. Lei Ba had advanced from the middle stage of the second refinement to the high stage of the second refinement. Kong Lu had also advanced from the middle stage of the second refinement to the high stage of the second refinement. Xia Yongxuan had advanced from the high stage of the second refinement to the peak of the second refinement. As for Feng Wuhan, he had advanced from the peak of the second refinement to the limit of the second refinement. Although this trip to the ice secret realm had not allowed them to break through to the third refinement, it had allowed their strength to increase significantly. In fact, it was easier said than done to break through to the third refinement. Many experts at the limit of the second refinement were stuck at that step, unable to break through for the rest of their lives. One had to know that any third refinement peerless expert could become the leader of a superpower. However, to be able to break through a small level was already an extremely rare thing. Their overall strength had increased by a level. This time, we have returned with a rewarding journey. Feng Wuhan laughed. Bastards of the imperial court, your grandpa, Lei, cannot wait to let you all taste the power of lightning. Lei Ba laughed. He clenched his fists, and lightning flashed. A powerful energy rippled in all directions. The six of them walked out of the ice palace, and the doors of the palace closed once again. Although they did not obtain the inheritance of the Ice Saint Sovereign, each of them had obtained a suitable reward. That was enough for them. After walking out of the ice palace, everyone turned around and bowed towards the ice palace. Shortly after, they looked at each other and laughed loudly. They then quickly walked towards the exit of the ice secret realm. After walking out of the ice palace, they did not encounter any ice demon generals or ice demons. This made their plan to kill more ice demon generals and ice demons to obtain the frigid ice chalcedony fall through. After leaving the ice secret realm, they appeared in the cave. As soon as they appeared, they immediately felt a powerful aura circling around the cave. It filled the air and filled the surroundings. So many peerless experts. Everyone's expression changed. Could it be that the ice secret realm has been discovered? Lei Ba asked. No, it shouldn't be. If it has been discovered, that group of peerless experts will definitely appear here. Kong Lu said calmly. Moreover, the spatial seal that I set up is not damaged at all. The Heavenly Mountain region is just a small region that lacks vitality. A peerless expert only appeared a few 100,000 years ago. After that, there were no more peerless experts. If it wasn't for the ice secret realm, why would there be so many peerless experts here? Feng Wuhan seemed to be talking to himself. Shortly after, he seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed, and he looked at Chu Mu. The others also seemed to have thought of something, and they all looked at Chu Mu. Could it be that they know Chu Mu's whereabouts, and they are all here for Chu Mu? It seemed that this was the only guess. After all, the Sky Clan had issued the Heavenly Kill Order. They were using great rewards to lure the peerless experts of various races to find Chu Mu and kill Chu Mu. Thinking about it, there were more than 100 peerless experts. Chu Mu immediately revealed a smile. His eyes were filled with shocking battle intent and monstrous killing intent. More than 100 peerless experts had gathered in the Heavenly Mountain region. Their goal was to kill him. They really think highly of me, Chu Mu whispered. Even though he had the divine sealing compass, which eliminated the possibility of him being calculated, it did not eliminate other methods. Therefore, Chu Mu did not find it strange that his tracks were found. After all, it had been a few months since he had returned to the deep blue continent. Everyone, these people are here for me, not you, so... Chu Mu looked at the crowd and spoke. However, he was interrupted before he could finish. Ha 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 ha, my strength has just increased, and I was just about to have a big battle. I didn't expect that someone would send himself to his death. Leba laughed. I also want to test the strength of the second refinement and the power of the storm demon spirit. Feng Wuhan smiled gently. My sword is thirsting for blood. Xia Yongxuan had a lonely expression. You stole what I wanted to say. Wang Sun glanced at Xia Yongxuan and said, Chu Mu, the 6 of us have formed the Ancient Sword Alliance. We will advance and retreat together, whether it is against the imperial court or against other enemies. Kong Lu looked at Chu Mu and said solemnly, previously, when they had formed the Ancient Sword Alliance, they had made a heavenly oath to fight against the imperial court. There was no other reason. However, after the trip to the ice secret territory, their relationship had deepened. They had gone from ordinary friends to friends who could trust each other. Moreover, they had also seen Chu Mu's potential. He was not a peerless expert, but he could explode with the strength of the second refinement and even the third refinement. How shocking was that? As long as he did not die, he would definitely become a Saint Sovereign expert in the future. There were not many Saint Sovereigns in the deep blue world. Every one of them could leave their name in history. This was a kind of investment, a gamble. The wager might be their lives, but they did not hesitate. Perhaps there were other reasons, but no matter what, in the face of hundreds or even more absolute experts, they still stood on the same battlefront as him, facing the powerful enemies together. Chu Mu was grateful from the bottom of his heart. Brothers, since that's the case, then let our ancient sword alliance turn the world upside down and make them tremble in fear. Chu Mu's eyes flickered with a shocking glint as he spoke. All right, kill them until they tremble in fear. Kill them until they tremble in fear. Kill. The few of them laughed loudly. They felt that their relationship had deepened. They had vaguely turned from friends who could trust each other to brothers who could entrust their lives to each other. Kong Lu waved his hands and formed hand seals, unlocking the spatial seal. Once the spatial seal was unlocked, everyone's figures flashed as they flew out of the cave. Unlocking the spatial seal would consume Kong Lu's energy, but after his cultivation had increased, a portion of his energy would be consumed. He would quickly recover after taking medicinal pills. Soon, Chu Mu's group of 6 rushed out of the cave and flew into the sky. The moment they appeared, hundreds of auras gathered from all directions and swept over. Then, they all gathered on Chu Mu's body. All those who oppose our imperial court must die. The 4 royal guards of the imperial court soared through the air. Those who offend the celestial clan are doomed. The 8 forbidden guards of the celestial clan also charged over. Chumu, it's time for you to die. Chumu's life is mine. The peerless experts of the human clan also charged over from all directions. Their voices and killing intent were not concealed in the slightest. Could it be that this group of peerless experts entered the Heavenly Mountain domain to kill? The cultivators of the Heavenly Mountain domain were dumbfounded when they heard this. What kind of person was worth hundreds of peerless experts chasing after? As a small domain without any peerless experts, they were not qualified to know about the heavenly kill order of the Celestial Clan. Chapter 1940. In the sky above the Sky Mountain region, figures rushed over quickly. Each of them exuded an extremely shocking aura. It was like a volcano erupting with magma, like the roar of the sea with endless waves, like a storm that destroyed everything, or like a heavenly sword that cut through the void. The divine guard of the Sky Clan was high and mighty. The Imperial Guard had a terrifying aura that was between life and death. The many peerless experts of the human clan all had different auras. At this moment, they all rushed towards Chumu and locked onto him. This was a great honor. It was enough to make many people tremble in fear. That person is Feng Wuhen, and Xia Yongshuan. The other 5 people beside Chumu were all recognized. The 5 of them were peerless experts of the second refinement. Among the peerless experts, they were quite famous, especially Feng Wuhen, Xia Yongshuan, and Kong Lu. The limit of the second refinement. The peak of the second refinement. High second refinement. Middle second refinement. Their cultivation seems to have broken through. Could it be that they were hiding their cultivation before? Or is there some treasure in this Sky Mountain? The cultivation level and strength of these famous peerless experts were not a secret. Even the cultivation techniques they practiced were not a secret. But now the cultivation level was different from what they knew. It was inevitable that it would arouse suspicion. At the same time, they were also afraid. The weakest of the 5 peerless experts of the second refinement was at the middle second refinement. Once they stood on Chumu's side, it would not be easy to kill Chumu. They would have to pay a great price. The Imperial Court will only kill Chumu. Anyone who interferes will be killed without mercy. An Imperial Guard said coldly. As the secret power of the Imperial dynasty, the Imperial Guards, although they were strong and had shocking methods, they didn't want any unforeseen circumstances to occur during the mission. Feng Wuhen and the others were too strong. If there were unforeseen circumstances, it would affect their mission. But maybe because the Imperial dynasty was used to being overbearing, or maybe because the Imperial Guards were all like that, they didn't hold back at all and directly threatened him. My celestial race is not willing to kill more people. You guys back off. The leader of the Divine Guard 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 of the Divine Guard. This was because the 8 divine forbidden guards were all second refinement peerless powerhouses. The captain was at the peak of the second refinement, and the weakest of the others was at the high level of the second refinement. This kind of strength could be considered very strong. However, Feng Wuhen and the others were not weak either. If they wholeheartedly helped Chumu, it would be very difficult to kill Chumu. Moreover, they would have to pay a heavy price. The people of Tian Clan valued their own lives very much, especially when facing other races. There was always a kind of pride and a sense of superiority in their bones. Feng Wuhen, my target is Chumu. It has nothing to do with you guys. A peak second refinement expert of the human race said, Don't think that you guys can fight against us. Another peak second refinement expert said coldly, No matter how they threatened, no matter how oppressive their auras were, wind without trace, and the others remained unmoved. Whoever wants to die, come up. Your grandpa, Lei will fulfill your wish. Leba shouted. Terrifying lightning spread out from his body, and traces of destructive chi spread out, causing the group of people's faces to change drastically. Leba, who was at the high level of the second refinement, actually made some peak second refinement experts feel threatened. Although the rewards of the Tian clan are good, you still need to be alive to get it. As Kong Lu waved his hand casually, the power of space gradually spread out. This kind of fluctuation contained a shocking destructive power, as if it could tear the void apart at any time. Once the void was torn apart, there would definitely be terrifying spatial cracks that would be a threat to everyone. Wang Sun seemed to be holding something in his hand. That was his sword, an invisible and formless sword. His figure flashed and instantly vanished, entering the darkness of the void. He was like a hidden, poisonous snake, waiting for an opportunity to deliver a fatal blow. Clear wind. As if he was chanting, Feng Wuhan held the clear wind spirit sword in his hand and waved it gently. The sword slashed out in all directions. Wind blew out from nowhere and surrounded his body like a spirit of the wind. My sword hasn't tasted human blood for dozens of years. Xia Yongshuan sighed softly. His expression was desolate, as if he had lost something. His voice rang out and entered everyone's ears, causing them to fall into a trance. For some reason, a sense of sadness rose from their hearts. Those first refinement experts with weaker cultivations were unknowingly overwhelmed by sadness. They had no idea why they were feeling sad. A faint light spread out from between the eyebrows of the divine guard of the Tian clan, directly dispelling Xia Yongshuan's sadness. The faces of the 4 imperial guards were covered by their sinister, golden helmets. Only their eyes were exposed. They looked incomparably cold, as if they didn't belong to a living person. There was a deathly stillness in their eyes. As for the other peerless experts of the human clan, those with higher cultivations, such as those at the high level of the second refinement and the peak of the second refinement, although they were slightly affected, they quickly recovered. However, when they looked at Xia Yongshuan, their eyes were filled with deep fear. In their eyes, Xia Yongshuan was undoubtedly an even more terrifying opponent than Feng Wuhan. Although Xia Yongshuan's cultivation was inferior to Feng Wuhan's, the effect of his sadness was too great. Just imagine if they were affected by Xia Yongshuan's sadness in battle. Even if it only affected them for an instant, they might lose the initiative. If it was serious, they might even be killed. Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. The captain of the divine guard of the Tian clan raged. Set up the formation. With that order, the 8 divine guard of the Tian clan immediately set up a grand formation. Their auras linked together, growing and multiplying endlessly. The 4 imperial guardians took a step forward at the same time, stepping on the void. An incomparably terrifying rumbling sound rang out as countless ripples spread out in all directions. In the next breath, the silhouettes of the 4 imperial guardians disappeared. They hadn't truly disappeared. They also didn't have the ability to escape into the void. The reason they seemed to have disappeared was because their speed was too fast. In that instant, they seemed to have teleported. In an instant, the 4 figures appeared around Chu Mu. The golden swords in their hands slashed down from the sky. A terrifying killing intent caused the void beneath the swords to shatter inch by inch. The instant the Imperial Guards attacked, Chu Mu directly summoned his 2 swords and used blood hell burning the heavens. He used the sword domain transformation. With both swords in hand, he instantly slashed out. The cross sword light tore through the sky and directly imprinted itself on the body of one of the Imperial Guards, forcing him back. At the same time, the sword chi image was used. It shattered under the 3 golden sword light. The Imperial Guard that had been struck by Chu Mu's cross sword light had a deep cross mark on his chest. The mark had penetrated his armor and pierced deep into his flesh. That sword strike was the heaven and earth cross slash. Its power was shocking. It completely had the destructive power of the peak of the high second refinement. As for the 4 Imperial Guards, they were only at the high second refinement. However, that sword strike had not been able to kill him. It had only injured him. This made Chu Mu surprised at the defensive power of the Imperial Guard's armor. A strange scene appeared. The flesh under the cross mark wriggled and quickly recovered. In the end, even the Imperial Guard's golden armor was restored. This is... Chu Mu was slightly stunned. Self-healing from injuries was nothing strange. Chu Mu could also do it. Although it was rare to see a broken armor heal itself, it still existed. However, the self-healing of the Imperial Guard revealed a strange feeling. It was as if the Imperial Guard's golden armor was one with his flesh and blood. There was no time for Chu Mu to think properly. The 4 Imperial Guards had attacked once again. They had the strength of the high second refinement. Their cooperation was also very good. They could fight against an ordinary expert at the peak of the second refinement. Moreover, they had the characteristic of being immortal. In a battle, they could drag an expert at the peak of the second refinement to death. However, Chu Mu was not an ordinary expert at the peak of the second refinement. When he fully unleashed his battle strength, he had the strength of the peak of the second refinement, or even half a step to the third refinement. Sword God descends. The power of the secret technique was activated. The sharpness of the light increased sharply. His strength instantly rose to the level of half a step to the third refinement. Under the dual swords, the 4 Imperial Guards had no ability to resist at all. The difference between the high second refinement and half a step to the third refinement was too obvious. In the blink of an eye, the golden armor on each of the Imperial Guards was shattered. Their flesh and blood were badly mangled. However, they quickly wriggled and recovered quickly. Their recovery speed was not inferior to the Ice Demon Generals. This was the origin of the Imperial Guard's name, the Immortal Imperial Guards. They had an extremely strong defense and an extremely fast regenerative ability. Moreover, their cultivation was to fuse their armor with their flesh and blood, turning them into a kind of monster that was neither alive nor dead. However, in Chu Mu's opinion, there was a limit to all the so-called immortality. When that limit was exceeded, they would die. For example, under the absolute difference in strength, the 4 Imperial Guards had no ability to resist at all. Kill! 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 Under the sword light, the 4 Imperial Guards' bodies shattered and collapsed. The strange thing was that with a bit of flesh and blood as the center, the rest of the flesh and blood quickly drifted over in an attempt to recover. Shatter! Chu Mu struck out again, shattering the flesh and blood that had gathered together. However, after the flesh and blood was shattered, it gathered together again. It was very terrifying. On the other side, the 8 Divine Guard of the Divine Tribe who had set up the formation were blocked by Feng Wuhen and Xia Yongxuan. The other peerless experts of the human tribe who had charged over were fighting with the Thunder Tyrant's airflow. Wang Sun hid in the dark layer of the void, looking for an opportunity to kill with one strike. This was the battle between Chu Mu and the other 5 against over 100 peerless experts. Chapter 1941. Boom! As he waved his fists, countless bolts of lightning leaped from his gloves. Lightning arcs filled the air, condensing into terrifying bolts of purple lightning. They descended from the sky and bombarded his enemies. With the strength of an advanced second refinement and the power of the Thunderbolt Core, each bolt of lightning carried a terrifying destructive power. There seemed to be a trace of destructive power faintly contained within it, making one's heart palpitate. Even a peak second refinement expert did not dare to underestimate it. Kong Lu gently clenched his fist, and the space in front of him immediately collapsed. Under the crack, a terrifying power directly tore apart a peak second refinement expert. Even his primordial spirit could not escape and was directly sucked into the spatial crack. Facing the attacks of others, Kong Lu had a great advantage. Wearing the void armor, he could easily escape into the void and avoid the attacks, unless the attacks were powerful enough to break through the void. To a second refinement, peerless powerhouse, breaking through the void was not difficult. However, to break through the void and injure the target within the spatial crack was very difficult. Unless one had the strength of the third refinement, that was impossible. Wang Sun's figure suddenly flashed. With a wave of his right hand, he pierced through the forehead of a peak first refinement expert, shattering his primordial spirit. In the next breath, he disappeared again, hiding in the dark side of space. The three of them had all brought out their true strength. As there were many strong enemies, they could not afford to relax. Fortunately, although there were many strong enemies, they were like a sheet of loose sand. There was no organization, and there was no tacit cooperation between them. They fought for themselves. After all, this group of peerless experts came from different sects or independent cultivators. They were competitors among themselves. They all wanted to kill Chu Mu and obtain the divine clan's reward. They did not trust each other at all. The battle formation set up by the 8 divine clan forbidden guards allowed the 8 people's strength to be integrated into one. They advanced and retreated according to the rules, and had both offensive and defensive capabilities. Their strength had surpassed the peak of second refinement and stepped into the half-step third refinement. Fo Muhen was at the peak of second refinement. When he used the storm demon spirit, his strength would increase further. Xia Yongshuan was at the peak of second refinement. When he used his full strength, he was close to the peak of second refinement. The two of them worked together and barely managed to resist the 8 divine clan forbidden guards. Under Chu Mu's sword, the 4 imperial guardians' flesh and blood were torn apart, but they reassembled again and again, only to be scattered by Chu Mu again and again. What the hell is this? Chu Mu frowned. Although his strength had reached the half-step third refinement, it was because he had used various secret techniques. The sword domain transformation secret technique could be maintained for a long time. The blood prison secret technique could also be recovered by consuming blood essence pills. Only the sword god's descent secret technique could be recovered quickly by absorbing the essence of heaven and earth energy. However, the essence of heaven and earth energy was extremely precious. Therefore, once it was consumed, it could only be recovered slowly. It would usually take months or even years. Unfortunately, the second level of the sword god's descent secret technique was his greatest reliance. Once the secret technique's power was exhausted, his strength would decrease by 100-fold. At most, he would only be able to maintain the strength of an advanced second refinement. Fortunately, Chu Mu's mastery of the secret technique's power had become more unique. He only used the secret technique's power when he attacked with his sword. He didn't need to maintain it at all times to reduce the consumption of the secret technique's power. However, the 4 Imperial Guardians couldn't be completely destroyed. They didn't seem to have primordial spirits, or perhaps their primordial spirits had fused with their bodies. Unless their bodies were completely destroyed, they wouldn't die at all. Even if they were shattered, they could still reassemble. After being shattered again and again, Chu Mu also discovered that the speed at which the Imperial Guardians' flesh and blood reassembled had decreased. In other words, they weren't truly immortal. Every time they reassembled, they would consume a certain amount of energy. Once their energy was exhausted, they would also die. After discovering this, Chu Mu wasn't happy. This was because he silently calculated that if he wanted to completely destroy the 4 Imperial Guardians, the second level of the Sword God's Descent secret technique would consume a large portion of its power. Void shatter! With a low roar, the space where the Imperial Guardians' flesh and blood were reassembling suddenly shattered. It turned into a black hole and directly swallowed the Imperial Guardians' flesh and blood, sucking it into the turbulence of the void. It turned out that when Kong Lu was dodging the enemy's attack, he happened to discover Chu Mu's situation and immediately came to his aid. seeing the 4 Imperial Guardians' flesh and blood being sucked into the black hole. Chumu wasn't angry. Instead, he heaved a sigh of relief. After nodding to Kong Lu, he charged towards the other supreme experts. Not only did these supreme experts not know Chumu, but they also didn't have any conflicts of interest before. However, this time they were here to kill Chumu. Since that was the case, they were his enemies. Since they were his enemies, he couldn't show any mercy. I'll use you guys to test my newly comprehended sword move, Chumu thought. He originally planned to use this move to deal with the Imperial Guardians, but Kong Lu acted first and sucked them into the black hole. Sword move, Eternal Vitality. With a low roar, the eternal spiritual sword slashed forward. The sword's spirit of life that had been refined into the eternal spiritual sword seemed to have been activated. A strange power combined with Chumu's power. When the eternal spiritual sword attacked, it immediately condensed into a lotus burning with blood-red flames. As it spun, it blasted towards the group of supreme experts in front of him. The strongest of the supreme experts who wanted to kill Chumu was only at the peak of the 2nd refinement. Facing Chumu's eternal vitality that was a half step to the 3rd refinement, they didn't have much ability to resist. Under the blood-red lotus, one after another, the supreme experts of the 1st refinement were directly killed and turned into nothingness. Even their primordial spirits were completely destroyed. The supreme experts of the 2nd refinement were extremely shocked and quickly attacked the blood-red lotus. 1 attack was ineffective, 2 attacks had an effect, and 3 attacks began to weaken the power of the blood-red lotus. However, this sword move was called Eternal Vitality. Within it, there was a force of vitality that caused the blood-red lotus to weaken and recover as it spun. The power of the eternal vitality was beyond Chumu's expectations. Perhaps in terms of absolute power, it wasn't as strong as the great heavenly might sword move or the heavenly slaughter and earthly calamity sword move. However, it won in terms of toughness and strength. The eternal vitality wasn't absolute. There was a limit. After reaching the limit, the blood-red lotus trembled and immediately exploded, turning into countless sharp, blood-red sword chi that tore through the sky. The group of supreme experts' expressions changed drastically. They were extremely shocked and hurriedly dodged or blocked. When all the blood-red sword chi disappeared, Chumu was also shocked by the damage caused by his sword move. More than 10 supreme experts of the 1st refinement were dead, and more than 10 were injured. 6 supreme experts of the 2nd refinement were dead, and 5 were injured. 1 sword move, just 1 sword move, had caused such a terrifying amount of damage. This eternal vitality was really a shocking group attack move. Of course, it was also because Chumu used the strength of a half step to the 3rd refinement to perform this move. It was very difficult to kill supreme experts, unless the difference in strength was too great. Chumu's strength could be considered as a half step to the 3rd refinement, but his opponents weren't fools. They wouldn't stay where they were to be attacked by him. 1 sword move had caused so many casualties. This had already shocked them, and then they were terrified. This was the person they wanted to kill? Lei Ba and the others were also shocked. They knew that Chumu was powerful, but they didn't expect him to be so fierce. 1 sword move killed more than 20 supreme experts and injured more than 20 of them. Blood sprayed out from the dead, peerless experts like rain. Their corpses fell from a height of 1,000 meters. No matter how strong the peerless experts' bodies were, their flesh was lacerated and their bones were broken. Blood flowed out, dyeing the craters below them red. For Imperial guards were sucked into the spatial black hole, and it was unknown whether they were dead or alive. More than 20 supreme experts died, and their corpses fell from the sky. More than 20 supreme experts were injured. Such a terrifying result directly shocked the other supreme experts. Let's go. The few supreme experts didn't hesitate and quickly turned to leave. Although the rewards of the sky race were good, They could only enjoy them if they were alive. If they were dead, what was the use? Don't be afraid. He definitely doesn't have much strength left. There were also people who didn't want to leave just like that. Instead, they shouted loudly. As soon as they finished speaking, clouds suddenly filled the air in front of them. A wisp of extremely condensed sword light silently pierced through the clouds and pierced through them. They were only at the advanced second refinement, so how could they block Chu-Mu, who was a half step to the third refinement and had used void steps? Let's go! Let's go! This sword instantly killed an advanced second refinement expert, causing the fear in the hearts of those who were lucky to be magnified infinitely. They directly exploded with all their speed and quickly left. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 supreme experts who had tried to kill Chu-Mu had died, and the rest fled. Next, it's you guys. Chu-Mu didn't chase after the group of supreme experts because they were already scared out of their wits. He turned to look at the divine guards of the sky race who were surrounding Feng Wuhen and Xia Yongxuan. His voice was filled with killing intent. Although Feng Wuhen and Xia Yongxuan were powerful, they were suppressed by the 8 divine guards. They could only block and dodge, and it was difficult for them to counterattack. Kill! Lei Ba roared, and his fist struck the sky. Violent lightning fell from the sky and struck a divine guard. When the lightning struck the divine guard, it was blocked by a force and scattered. Void change rend. Kong Lu used his full strength and used an offensive secret technique. Unfortunately, with the advanced second refinement and the void armor activated, this move was enough to kill a peak second refinement expert and threaten a peak second refinement expert. However, it was still insufficient against a half step to the third refinement expert. Heavenly slaughter, earthly calamity. At this moment in the void, because of the fierce battle just now, the yuan qi of heaven and earth was chaotic and violent. It was an excellent environment, and it was suitable for the heavenly slaughter, earthly calamity sword style to be used. Under the 2 swords, even the sky and earth were supported by his body. He attracted the power of the sky and earth, and with his own power as the control, it converged into the 2 swords. As the sword vibrated, he slashed out and his body spun and slashed out a second time. Chapter 1942. The 2 resplendent sword light were like crescent moons moving rapidly in the sky. They cut through the spatial barrier and charged towards the divine forbidden guard. The sword light could be seen by all the cultivators in the Tian Shan region as long as they raised their heads. It was like a brand that was deeply engraved in everyone's mind. It was unforgettable. Heavenly slaughter, earthly calamity, sword style. 1 sword to break the sky, 1 sword to split the earth. It was earth-shattering and unparalleled. This was the most powerful move among the various sword styles that Chu-Mu had mastered. Even the great heavenly might sword style was slightly inferior. If it weren't for Feng Wuhen and Xia Yongxuan holding back the divine forbidden guard for him, once they formed a battle formation to deal with him, with a strength he could only resist for a while. Once the power of the sword god's descent was exhausted, his strength would definitely decline. At that time, he wouldn't be a match for the divine forbidden guard at all. Now, Feng Wuhen and Xia Yongxuan were at a disadvantage. It was fine if they didn't attack, but once they did, they used their most powerful killing moves. Lei Ba's attack and Kong Lu's attack couldn't threaten the divine forbidden guard under the battle formation. However, Chu-Mu's heavenly slaughter, earthly calamity sword style, when used with his half-step third refinement strength, had a terrifying power that could threaten the early third refinement. By the time the divine forbidden guard felt threatened, it was already too late. The 2 sword light had already arrived. Easily, the 2 sword light broke through the divine forbidden guard's battle formation. It cut through the body of 1 divine forbidden guard and instantly tore it apart. It rushed out and cut through the body of the 2nd divine forbidden guard. The terrifying power of the heavenly slaughter, earthly calamity sword style also tore apart the primordial spirits of the 2 divine forbidden guards, completely killing them. The moment the battle formation's power was broken, the battle formation stopped operating. Feng Wuhen and Xia Yongxuan immediately seized the opportunity and used their powerful sword moves. The sword was like a cool breeze. As the cool breeze blew, it contained the destruction of a storm. The strength of the peak of the second refinement was unleashed to the extreme and surpassed. Under this sword, the divine forbidden guards that he had chosen were only at the high level of the second refinement. Even if they used their full strength, they would not be able to withstand it. Moreover, the moment the power of the battle formation was broken, they were also affected to a certain extent, and their reactions were a step slower. This was also the price of a battle matrix. Forming a battle matrix would give one greater strength. If a battle matrix was forcibly broken, it would also be affected to a certain extent. Even if it was only a slight effect, it would be magnified 10 times or more in the eyes of the strong. Grief filled Xia Yongxuan's sword, and the world grieved as well. The divine guard who had been affected by the destruction of the battle formation lost the ability to resist in that instant. A sense of sorrow filled their hearts, as they could not help but think of their sorrowful past. With a single slash, he killed the divine forbidden guard who was still grieving and unable to wake up in time. In the blink of an eye, after Chu Mu broke through the formation, 4 divine guards had died. Just as the remaining 4 divine guards broke free from their grief, incomparably sharp sword light flashed before their eyes, filling the world. 2 of them were Chu Mu's, 1 was Feng Wuhen's, and 1 was Xia Yongxuan's. Of the 2 divine guards that Chu Mu had chosen, 1 was at the peak of the second refinement, and the other was the captain at the peak of the second refinement. As for Feng Wuhen, he had chosen a high level of the second refinement. Xia Yongxuan had also chosen a high level of the second refinement. First, they were affected by the destruction of the battle matrix. Then, because of the impact of Xia Yongxuan's grief, the divine forbidden guard had completely lost the initiative. After suppressing the peak of the second refinement with a single slash, Chu Mu attacked with all his strength. He activated the power of the metal spirit and used the worldly cross slash to attack the peak of the second refinement. Even though the people of the Tian clan had outstanding talent and could often fight against experts of other races, a god-forbidden guard at the limit of the second refinement was not enough to contend against a half-step third refinement expert, let alone in a situation where they had lost the initiative. The resplendent worldly cross sword light tore through the void and struck the captain's body. His armor shattered, and the worldly cross sword light cut through his skin without any resistance. The terrifying sword chi that contained all sorts of power rapidly invaded his body and caused a series of destruction. Although the worldly cross slash activated by the metal spirit's power was only at the half step to the third refinement, it was infinitely close to the true third refinement. The incomparably sharp worldly cross sword light tore through the captain's body and tore him to pieces. Xiao Qin turned around and used his sword technique, Chop Dao. Then he chopped apart another peak second refinement divine guard from head to toe. The instant Chu Mu killed the 2 guards, Feng Wuheng and Xia Yongxuan also killed their opponents. The 8 divine race guards were unable to display much of their strength before they were completely killed. The peerless human experts in the distance were all stunned. They were frightened by Chu Mu and quickly retreated. However, they did not go far away. Instead, they watched from afar because there were still the divine race guards. The divine race was the noblest and most powerful race in the deep blue world. Their purpose in chasing after Chu Mu was also for the divine race's reward. Therefore, they all felt that the 8 divine race guards would be able to kill Chu Mu. This was the result they hoped for the most. This was because they had been scared out of their wits by Chu Mu. Afterwards, they became angry out of shame. However, the situation was different from what they had imagined. It was even the opposite. Not only were the 8 powerful divine race guards unable to do anything to Chu Mu, but they had also died under Chu Mu's sword. All 8 of them had died. Not a single one was left alive. The palaces of the Heavenly Mountain Palace had all collapsed from the battle, turning into ruins. Dozens of corpses of peerless experts had smashed holes in the ruined palaces. Blood flowed out, staining a large area. The bright red color was dazzling. After killing his opponents, Chu Mu did not feel anything wrong with the heart and sword as one. He stopped the Sword God's Descent secret technique and stopped the Blood Prison Burning Sky secret technique. He quickly took out a blood essence pill to replenish his blood essence. Finally, he stopped the Sword Domain transformation. His aura continued to drop until it finally stopped at the middle stage of the second refinement. "Thank you, brothers," said Chu Mu. "There's no time to lose. Immediately collect the spoils and leave this place," said Feng Wuheng with a smile. Everyone quickly took action and quickly took away the spatial rings of the supreme experts they had killed. This only took a short amount of time. Then they quickly left. After a while, the group of peerless experts in the distance dared to approach. Looking at the corpses of the peerless experts in the palace ruins, they all felt their hair stand on end. A chill rose from the depths of their hearts and spread throughout their bodies. They could not help but shiver. They actually wanted to chase after such a terrifying person. They killed 8 divine race guards. "They won't live for long," said someone with hatred. Someone said hatefully, "I saw it very clearly. The reason why Chu Mu is so strong is because of several secret techniques. However, these secret techniques cannot be sustained for long. Therefore, he will definitely die. Whether he lives or not, it has nothing to do with me," said someone else. "Let's go. I plan to go into seclusion and not come out." News of the battle in the sky above the Sky Mountain region spread quickly. Thus, the world knew that Chu Mu's strength was half a step to the third refinement. Thus, they also knew that Chu Mu was not alone. He had 5 powerful companions. The names of his 5 companions were also widely known. The Heaven Race's God-forbidden guards were all mobilized and left Cloud Heaven City. Other than Chu Mu, there were 5 more targets they had to kill. The Imperial Court. In the deepest part of the palace, behind an ancient and heavy door, was a mysterious place. Only the Saint Emperor and the 10 kings who had founded the Imperial Court knew about it. The interior of the secret chamber was pitch black. Even a martial saint would not be able to see anything clearly. In fact, even a first refinement expert would be greatly affected. Only those who had reached the second refinement could barely see anything. Even so, they could only see things that were close to them. All of a sudden, the absolute darkness suddenly lit up. A terrifying aura instantly erupted and swept out in all directions. As the darkness retreated, everything in the secret room was finally revealed. The secret room was circular. There were a total of 18 depressions. In each depression, there was a person sitting. No, 4 of the depressions were empty. They were the 4 Imperial Guards who had been sent out. Summon the 15-15-16-78 back. The Imperial Guard who sat in the first position was an old man. He said weakly. Immediately, the 14 Imperial Guards all moved. They formed hand seals and hit the altar in the center of the secret room. The ancient altar started to operate. Rays of light flashed and a terrifying aura spread out from the ancient altar. Then, as if the void was torn apart, pieces of flesh and blood floated out from the crack. As soon as they appeared on the altar, they quickly condensed. Not long after, the 4 Imperial Guards appeared. However, their auras were much weaker than usual. After being smashed by Chu Mu many times and being sucked into the spatial crack, they were lucky to be alive. It was normal for their strength to be weakened. It would take a long time for them to recover. However, these Imperial Guards were indeed terrifying. Even the spatial crack was unable to completely destroy them. As expected of the undead Imperial Guards, the 4 Imperial Guards returned. The leader of the Imperial Guards, the old man who looked lifeless, also passed the news to the Battle King. After the Battle King received the news, he was in a bad mood. His usual calmness was nowhere to be seen. His face was gloomy and his killing intent filled the entire palace. No one dared to enter. According to the rules of the imperial court, if the imperial order was not used once and the threat was not eliminated, then the imperial guards were not qualified to be sent out again. Normally, the imperial guards would not be sent out again. Their biggest responsibility was to protect the imperial court. The 5 heavenly generals were dead, and the imperial guards had failed. There were no more experts under the Battle King's command. To be able to make 4 second refinement imperial guards return in failure, their strength must be at least at the peak of the 2nd refinement. The Battle King muttered to himself, "It seems that this time I will have to personally take action." Chapter 1943. In a quiet and secluded valley, trees and grass grew beside the pool. It was lush and verdant. The pool was quiet and without ripples. It was like a mirror that reflected the blue sky and white clouds. It was relaxed and carefree. This battle is really carefree. Leiba laughed loudly. His laughter immediately destroyed the tranquility and spoiled the scenery. However, no one was dissatisfied because they were also excited. With the 6 of them, they had fought against over 100 peerless experts. Such a magnificent feat had never happened before. Most importantly, they had killed almost half of the peerless experts and scared the other half away. Of course, Chu Mu was one of the reasons for this. I have never killed anyone from the celestial race since I started cultivating. Now that I've killed them, it's no different from us humans. Feng Wuhan smiled. The celestial race was undoubtedly the top race in the deep blue world. Even though there weren't many of them, each of them had outstanding talent and were powerful. Moreover, they were extremely domineering. In the deep blue world, they almost had a dominating status. Therefore, when the cultivators of the various races encountered the celestial race, they wouldn't have any conflicts with them and would usually retreat. After all, the concept of the celestial race being high and mighty had been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people for countless years. Even if there were some people who were unwilling to be oppressed by the celestial race and rose up to resist, the result was that they were killed by the celestial race. Over time, for the sake of their own lives, no one resisted. Chu Mu wasn't a native of the deep blue world. Moreover, his sword Dao was incomparably firm. Anyone who tried to stop him would be cut apart by the sword in his hand. Therefore, no matter what race they were, no matter what background they had, as long as they wanted to kill him, they were all enemies. Enemies had to die. If the celestial race was the heavens, he would break the heavens with his sword. The celestial race has lost 8 forbidden guards in one go. With their domineering nature, they will definitely not let this matter rest. Perhaps they will mobilize their full strength. Kong Lu said. Although he was happy, he was also a little solemn. After all, the celestial race was an extremely powerful race. Even in the era when the Saint Emperor didn't appear, the celestial race's experts were still the strongest in the deep blue world. Ever since the celestial race's people died under my sword, the celestial race has never had the intention of letting this matter rest. Chu Mu said indifferently. This was not the first time he had been chased by the Tian clan. Between him and the Tian clan, there was already an irreconcilable grudge. Among the celestial races, there is no lack of 3rd refinement peerless and 4th refinement peerless. There are even holy venerates, more than one. Xia Yongshuan said with a solemn expression, "With the death of the 8 second refined divine guards, the celestials will definitely send out even stronger divine guards. Our current strength is still insufficient." After the trip to the ice secret domain, everyone's strength had obviously increased. Normally, this kind of improvement would be worth celebrating, but now there were too many strong enemies, and they were even stronger than them. This kind of improvement was far from enough. The 3rd refinement is easier said than done. Feng Wuhan sighed. With his strength at the peak of 2nd refinement, when he said such words, the emotions in the others' hearts became even more obvious. Chu Mu was also helpless. His true cultivation was only at the peak of the Saint realm. If he did not use any secret techniques, his strength could reach the middle stage of the second refinement. If he used all his secret techniques, his strength could reach the half step to the third refinement. When he used the great heavenly might sword style or the heavenly slaughter earthly calamity sword style, his attack power could barely reach the early stage of the third refinement. However, it was still not enough. In the end, his own cultivation was still too low. If he could truly reach the level of a peerless expert, he would be even stronger after using his secret techniques. It would not be a problem for him to fight against a third refinement peerless expert. However, there was no other way. He chose the path of true intent and not the laws. Chu Mu did not regret this. Apart from the celestial race, the imperial court is also a variable, Chu Mu said. The 4 experts of the imperial court are very strange. They cannot be killed. Perhaps that is the secret power of the imperial court, Xia Yongshuan said. Strength. Lei Ba clenched his fists and said in anger. The strong imperial court and the even stronger celestial race would definitely make one feel despair when facing such a huge force. Brothers, I am unable to help you break through, but I have a secret technique here. If you cultivate it, after using it, you should be able to increase your strength by several times. Chu Mu said, I obtained this secret technique from an enemy. It is called blood hell burning heaven. It burns one's own essence blood in exchange for strength. That's good. Hearing that it was a secret technique obtained from killing an enemy, they did not feel any burden in their hearts. After all, some secret techniques were passed down by the sect and could not be taught to outsiders. Chu Mu taught the 5 of them the blood hell burning heaven. Normally, don't burn more than 30% of your essence blood. After Chu Mu finished, he said, if you burn more than 30%, it might affect your foundation. Brothers, after burning your essence blood, you need to replenish it. I have a secret technique that cannot increase your strength, but it can refine the blood of spirit beasts into essence blood pills to replenish your own. Chu Mu said, then what are we waiting for? Let's go and hunt spirit beasts. Everyone left the valley and entered the mountain range to hunt spirit beasts for Chu Mu to refine into essence blood pills. There are 240 essence blood pills. Each of us will split 40, so it should be enough. With the 6 of them working together, and since they were specifically dealing with 9-star Saint Realm spirit beasts, it was really simple. Very quickly, they obtained over 200 essence blood pills. With enough essence blood pills, everyone tried to use the blood hell burning heaven secret technique. After all, the blood hell burning heaven secret technique burned one's essence blood to increase their strength. The extent of the increase was closely related to one's essence blood. Sun Jin was a Saint Body Dao practitioner and had evolved into a spiritual body. His essence blood was very powerful. After burning 30% of his essence blood, his strength increased tenfold. Chu Mu also cultivated the Saint Body Dao. Although he had not evolved into a spiritual body, he had reached the peak of the Saint Body Dao. All the blood in his body had been converted into essence blood, and he was very powerful. After burning 30% of his essence blood, his strength could increase by 8 times. Lei Ba and the others tried to use the blood hell burning heaven one by one. After burning 30% of their essence blood, their strength increased by about 5 times. After all, they were not Saint Body Dao practitioners. Each of their saint bodies was only at the 6th or 7th grade. It was normal that the increase was not as good as Chu Mu's. However, with their strength, after using the blood hell burning heaven, their strength increased by 5 times. It was a very obvious increase. If I use the blood hell burning heaven, I can fight against a half-step 3rd refinement cultivator. Feng Wuhan said, however, before we know the secret power of the imperial court, I feel that it is not appropriate to kill our way into the imperial court. Their strength had increased. but in the end, they were still not strong enough. They could not fight against an ancient and powerful force like the imperial court. It is difficult to increase one's strength overnight. Kong Lu said, fighting against the imperial court is not something that can be done overnight. We have to hide ourselves and slowly develop and become stronger. That is the only way. You all have no chance. A cold and overbearing voice seemed to descend from the sky. Then an extremely terrifying aura pressed down like an invisible ancient divine mountain. Everyone felt their vision darken. The terrifying aura pressed down as if the sky was collapsing. It was unparalleled, as if the sky was about to be destroyed. Wang Sun, who had the lowest cultivation, trembled and spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was pale and his aura was weak. Lei Ba and Kong Lu were also trembling. They were only slightly slower than Wang Sunday. They spat out blood and their faces were pale. Xia Yongshuin and Feng Wuhen were very strong. However, under this sudden and terrifying aura, they could not resist it. Their bodies swayed and they groaned. Blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. Their faces were pale and their auras weakened. Only Chu Mu was able to forcibly resist the terrifying aura descending from the sky. Even so, he still felt a bit uncomfortable. Among the 6 of them, if he did not use a secret technique, Chu Mu's strength could only be considered at the intermediate level of the 2nd refinement, which was the same as Wang Sunday. However, his spiritual will was stronger than Feng Wuhen's and half-step 3rd refinement. Even compared to an ordinary beginner level of the 3rd refinement, it was comparable. Therefore, when he was suppressed by this sudden and terrifying aura, he felt his spiritual world tremble. However, he relied on his incomparably strong spiritual will to resist it. Moreover, with the divine sealing compass in his spiritual world, it was more than 10 times more stable. This allowed Chu Mu to completely resist the impact of this terrifying aura. Oh, you can actually withstand an attack from my aura. You are indeed a rare monster. You cannot be left alive. That incomparably tyrannical voice rang out once again, descending from the sky. Following that aura grew even more powerful. Furthermore, it contained an astonishing will, a terrifying will that was unparalleled in 100 battles, a will that could break through the heavens and earth. That was battle intent. The will that was supported by the will to fight suddenly increased. Feng Wuhen and Xia Yongshuin were unable to resist at all. They spat out blood and fell to the ground. The others were unable to resist and directly fainted. Chu Mu's body trembled. It was as if a giant hammer had struck his spiritual world. His entire spiritual world was in turmoil and was about to shatter. The patterns on the divine sealing compass immediately emitted a light and quickly spread out. It passed through his meridians and affected the entire spiritual world. In an instant, it further strengthened the spiritual world. As his body swayed, Chu Mu took a step back. His face was a little pale, but he was not injured. He clenched his hands, and a spirit sword appeared in his hand. He directly used a secret technique. Blood prison burns the heavens. Sword domain change. Sword god descends. Facing such a terrifying enemy, Chu Mu did not dare to hold back at all. Spirit of metal, innate spirit of water, and spirit of earth. The 3 essences of the power of heaven and earth were also stimulated. The power of the spirit of metal was injected into the 2 swords. The power of the innate spirit of water wandered between the muscles and bones of his body. The power of the spirit of earth covered his skin. The combination of the innate spirit of water and the spirit of earth, one inside and one outside, gave Chu Mu's body an extremely strong defense. On his body he was wearing the blood shark armor and the blood shark robe. In total, he had 4 layers of defense. In addition to his pinnacle level 9 saint body, he had 5 layers of defense. It could be said that from the time he had encountered a strong enemy until now, this was the first time Chu Mu had used all the power he could use. Chapter 1944. Unleashing his full strength, Chu-Mu raised his head and looked at the sky. Under the terrifying aura, the sky seemed to have turned into darkness. It was difficult to see anything. Chu-Mu's eyes flashed with a sharp light. They were like heavenly swords that could shatter the sky. He could vaguely see a figure standing in the dark sky. It was as if it had existed since ancient times. The figure was blurry. Chu-Mu suddenly lowered his head and saw a pair of bright eyes. They were like the eyes of a god. They quickly magnified in Chu-Mu's eyes and filled his entire world. It made his heart tremble. The aura was overwhelming. It had completely surpassed the level of the second refinement. This was a peerless cultivator of the third refinement. Even though Chu-Mu's strength could reach the level of half a step to the third refinement under the continuous accumulation of his strength, and could even threaten the beginner level of the third refinement, he had not truly stepped into the third refinement. Therefore, he did not know how strong a true third refinement cultivator was. Now he finally understood. Just the suppression of the aura was so terrifying that it almost made him lose the ability to resist. Of course, this was also because this peerless cultivator of the third refinement was even more terrifying. The aura that he exuded was not just the aura of a peerless cultivator of the third refinement. It was also fused with an astonishing will, the battle will. Those with the battle will spent their lives fighting. They fought against the heavens, the earth, and themselves. They fought endlessly and endlessly. They lived by fighting and died by fighting. It was extremely terrifying. Under the battle will, the aura directly multiplied and directly attacked the spiritual world. It was even several times more terrifying. It distorted Chu-Mu's perception and made it difficult for him to look straight at it. Could it be that I have to use the sword will? Chu-Mu thought to himself. The battle will was a kind of willpower, and the sword will was also a kind of willpower. It was difficult to distinguish between the two. At this time, Chu-Mu's sword will had to be suppressed by the eternal sword will because the annihilation sword will had not been completely transformed. Unknowingly, Chu-Mu temporarily lost a way to fight against the enemy. In the past, the strong opponents he encountered in battle were not enough for him to use the sword will. He did not feel much. Now it was very obvious. No, it's not the last resort yet. Chu-Mu thought in his heart. He was very clearly aware that when facing such a formidable enemy, it wasn't something that could be accomplished by utilizing a small portion of his sword intent. He had to utilize it completely, and the outcome of utilizing his sword intent was extremely obvious. The obliteration sword intent that hadn't transformed completely would collapse because of this, causing all his efforts to be in vain. Therefore, it was fine if he didn't use his sword intent. But once he did, the consequences would be terrible, and all his previous efforts would be wasted. All of the divine, desolate sword essence rushed out from his dantian. In his meridians, it was like the water of a great river, surging without stopping. His blood essence surged like lava from a volcano. A tyrannical power constantly emanated from within, surging through his bones and muscles, bringing about an incomparably tyrannical power. Under the unity of energy technique, the power of sword origin and the power of chi and blood merged perfectly. The two swords vibrated incessantly as if they were excited. Chu-Mu, swear your loyalty to me and serve me. You have killed my imperial courts, 5 heavenly generals and battle envoys. The grudge between us is over. Another voice came from the sky. The voice wasn't loud, but it seemed to resound through the heavens and earth. It was extremely domineering and filled with unparalleled battle intent. It struck Chu-Mu deep in his heart, shaking his mind. It made Chu-Mu unconsciously have the impulse to agree. If Chu-Mu's mental will was slightly weaker, he would definitely be affected and unable to resist. However, Chu-Mu's mental will was sufficiently strong, and he forcefully broke free from the other party's influence. You are the Battle King. It seemed to be a question, but also a confirmation. This was Chu-Mu's counterattack. Following his words, a shocking sword chi suddenly surged out from Chu-Mu's body. It tore through the heavens and cut through the darkness. It seems like you have already made your choice. It's a pity. It was a pity, but there wasn't the slightest hint of regret. Invincible finger, earth splitting. With a low shout, the figure in the sky suddenly stretched out a finger, locking onto Chu-Mu from afar, and pointed it downwards. A huge finger condensed in the air and instantly pointed downwards. The tip of the finger rapidly enlarged in Chu-Mu's eyes. The fingerprints on the finger were clearly visible, as if they contained some kind of unique mystery. A shocking battle intent gathered on the finger, releasing a terrifying pressure. It could be seen that the void was unable to withstand the power of that huge finger. Inch by inch, pitch-black cracks appeared and spread out. It was like a piece of white paper being cut by a blunt knife. The power of that finger was so tyrannical. Before it even landed, Chu-Mu already felt as if he was an ant being crushed. Inch by inch cracks appeared on the ground beneath his feet and rapidly spread out. In the blink of an eye, the cracks had spread hundreds of meters away. Chu-Mu tried his best to widen his eyes, mobilizing all the power in his body. Blue veins bulged on his arms, containing an incomparably terrifying power. He brandished his two swords, crossing them, as if he could cut through all obstacles. He only felt that the pressure above him had loosened a little. He immediately soared into the sky, erupting with all his strength and brandishing his two swords. Rays of sword light, like a torrential downpour, blasted towards the sky. Cloud-piercing Dao-beheading Jintian, displaying various sword moves. Heaven and earth cross slash. Sword light was extremely intense. Chu-Mu didn't dare to let that huge finger fall. The terrifying power let him know that once the huge finger fell, the earth would shatter and Kong Lu and the other four wouldn't be able to survive. Therefore, he could only face it head-on, brandishing his sword. Rays of sword light tore through the sky, slashing towards the huge finger. When they collided with the huge finger, the rays of sword light were all shattered. However, under the many rays of sword light, Chu-Mu had unleashed all his strength. They were even more tyrannical than ordinary half-step third refinement, causing a certain degree of damage to the huge finger. Six-path sword style. 6 pitch-black vortexes were arranged in a straight line, each of them collapsing under the huge finger. Every time a pitch-black vortex was destroyed, it would absorb a little of the huge finger's power. After all 6 vortexes were destroyed, the lines on the huge finger became blurry. Heaven and earth cross slash. The incomparably brilliant heaven and earth cross sword light shot out, as if it was branded in the void. It was extremely dazzling, and its power was close to the initial third refinement. It imprinted on the huge finger, leaving behind a faint cross mark, causing the huge finger to pause slightly. Immediately, the heaven and earth cross sword light shattered inch by inch, dissipating into rays of light, and the fingerprint on it became even more blurry. At this moment, the huge finger had already fallen, and it was only a few meters away from Chu-Mu. A terrifying aura and fighting spirit directly attacked Chu-Mu's body and mind, making him feel that he couldn't resist. This was the power of the finger after its power had been continuously weakened by his sword moves. If it hadn't been weakened, how tyrannical would the power of the huge finger be? The invincible finger was indeed worthy of its name. 2 swords crossed. Chu-Mu once again displayed the heaven and earth cross slash, erupting with all his power. Time and space seemed to have stopped at this moment, and only Chu-Mu was holding the swords with both hands, crossing them, blocking the attack of the huge finger. This was only for a moment, but Chu-Mu's body trembled violently. An incomparably terrifying power bombarded the 2 swords from the huge finger, causing them to tremble and emit creaking sounds as if they couldn't bear the heavy burden. Immediately after, the terrifying power passed through the 2 swords, blasting into Chu-Mu's arms, and then through his arms, blasting into his body. The power was indescribable. After it blasted into his body, it raged wildly, as if it could tear everything apart. It wanted to tear Chu Mu's body into pieces. The invincible finger had 3 fingers. The first finger, Earth Split, had the power to split the earth and was extremely terrifying. Chu Mu's body seemed to have become the earth and was about to be torn apart. Blood prison burns the heavens. 40% of my blood essence, burn! Chu Mu instantly burned another 10% of his blood essence, and his strength rose once again. The tyrannical power in his body strengthened his body, resisting the impact of the earth split. The power of that finger was extremely tyrannical. Although Chu Mu could barely resist it, he was still injured. Many cracks appeared on his body, and blood flowed out. His entire body fell from the sky like a meteorite, crashing into the ground. With a bang, Chu Mu's body blasted a huge hole in the ground. In the center of the hole, there was a small, pitch-black hole. Chu Mu's body smashed into the hole, sinking dozens of meters into the ground. One finger, just one finger. Chu Mu, whose strength was comparable to a half step to the 3rd refinement, couldn't resist at all. Dozens of meters underground. Chu Mu was on the verge of death. His blood shark robe and blood shark armor were completely shattered, and his wounds were torn apart. Blood flowed out continuously, but powerful vitality continued to spread out. The vitality of the wood avatar also surged out continuously, rapidly healing his injuries. Chu Mu's vitality was already extremely strong, and could even be compared to those who had just formed the spiritual body. With the addition of the vitality of the wood avatar, his injuries healed rapidly, and his aura recovered rapidly. However, the power of that finger was too terrifying. Chu Mu estimated that even an expert at the initial 3rd refinement would find it difficult to resist, let alone him. He had never expected the warlord of the imperial court to be so powerful. Moreover, among the 10 kings of the imperial court, the warlord's strength wasn't even in the top 3. How terrifying was that? In Chu Mu's heart, a sliver of confusion involuntarily appeared. Was it wrong to go against the imperial court? Killing the envoys of the imperial court, killing the 5 generals of the imperial court, and even forcing the secret forces of the imperial court to retreat. All of this gave Chu Mu great confidence. However, a warlord had attacked. With just one finger, he couldn't resist at all. Such an opponent was so powerful, so terrifyingly powerful. How could he resist? If he couldn't resist such a strong opponent, then going against the imperial court would be a joke, a huge joke. With just one attack, his 5 companions lost their ability to resist and fainted. Although he was slightly better off, he wasn't a match for the warlord at all. They were on 2 completely different levels. Thinking about himself, his talent was outstanding, his perception was outstanding, and his future was limitless. However, what he walked on was the Tao of true intent. He didn't have a suitable cultivation technique for him to temper his true intent and truly step into the realm of a peerless expert. If he didn't step into the realm of a peerless expert, it would be very difficult for him to raise his strength.